Viker added, even though its eyesight is poor, its hearing is incredibly sharp. At this moment, Madame Eight Legs began to move, searching for its prey. Memories of an old man flashed through Viker's mind. He recalled a native elder telling him before the rewind about accidents he had heard and seen on the Leru Eleno mountain. The frightening image of the monster's legs was vividly etched in his memory. Viker thought back to a legend that sounded like a horror story. It spoke of something called Madame Eight Legs dwelling deep in the damp forest. In the Monster Dictionary of the Empire, this tale had been republished and revised several times. It still preserved the accounts of Madame Eight Legs' terrifying exploits. With these thoughts in mind, Viker earnestly looked at the creature. He watched as Madame Eight Legs opened its mouth, revealing sharp teeth and an enormous maw. It let out a tremendous roar. Countless droplets shot out from its mouth. Viker remembered what he had read. A danger level of S indicated a monster capable of destroying an entire nation in a single day with a threat level approaching disaster. The droplet flying from Madame Eight Legs' mouth turned out to be a highly potent poison. Any branch that came into contact with it melted away instantly. Then, Madame Eight Legs continuously sprayed her poison towards the crowd. Viker used his quick reflexes to dodge. Meanwhile, Adolf held his granddaughter tightly and cast a magic shield to protect them both. The Black Tribe members stood frozen in fear, mouths agape. Unfortunately, An wasn't so lucky and got hit. He panicked and shouted for help. My hair is covered in Madame's poison. In an instant, his hair was cut off. An, holding a knife, scolded him. You fool! How could you scream in front of Madame? The man fell to the ground, panting heavily. An, frustrated, clenched her teeth and muttered, Damn it, if you weren't Shaman's grandson, I would have killed you a long time ago. She glanced at Madame Eight Legs, who had heard a Hun scream and located their position. An quickly ordered her people. We need to retreat now. Adolf also quickly gathered his group and said, we need to head back too. As he spoke, he hugged his granddaughter and began to run. Madame Eight Legs was not easy to get past. It made a horrifying sound as one of its limbs slithered out. The current map was divided into two factions. The blue represented the Black Tribe, while the red symbolized Adolf's group. The Black members were retreating in small groups, while the Baskerville and Morg families were fleeing together. These two groups had slight differences in their retreat strategies, but those differences would determine whom the creature would chase. The monster lifted its legs in pursuit of a group of people. As expected, the main character's group was in danger. Adolf, holding Camus in his arms, thought to himself, damn it, why is it chasing us? One of his confident subordinates began to use his magic. He conjured a fireball and said, Lord Adolf, just leave it to me. The weakness of all these bugs has to be fire. With that, he launched the fireball ahead. The flames exploded upon hitting Madame Eight Legs. While he was celebrating, saying, it worked, he quickly boasted, Adolf, did you see that? Suddenly, Madame Eight Legs moved its limb through the guy next to him, just as he stood there bewildered by the blood splattering from his teammate. Tears welled up in his eyes. Seeing Madame Eight Legs completely intact without a single scratch terrified him and he screamed, but it had no effect on it. Adolf gritted his teeth and used all of his strength to run forward. Frustrated, he muttered, what the hell is that thing? Viker ran right beside him, silent and focused. Suddenly, he shouted, right now. Without paying any mind to the others, Viker turned around and faced Madame Eight Legs directly. Staffordshire was alarmed and quickly called out to him, young master, what are you planning to do? Viker calmly explained, if we keep going like this, we're all just going to end up dead. Someone has to step up and act as bait. Hearing this, Staffordshire immediately suggested, let me do it. But Viker quickly countered, do you really think with your skills you can hold that eight-legged monster back? We can't let it chase us all the way back to our territory. Among everyone here, you're the least suited to be the bait. Viker calmly shared his thoughts, leaving the crowd astonished. He grasped the hilt of his sword, turned, and prepared to face the creature directly. With a cold voice, he declared, it's me. He then addressed Adolf, saying, Lord Adolf, there's no more time. The decision is in your hands. Camus, still in shock, called out his name. Viker. Adolf quickly shouted, run. Hurry. Don't let my nephew's sacrifice be in vain. With that, he picked up his granddaughter and fled with the rest of the group. Camus wasn't ready to give up. She reached out, trying to hold on to Viker as she screamed. She yelled at him to come back, but Adolf told Camus, you stay put. Viker's hand gripping the sword's hilt froze. Then, all of a sudden, he let go, dropping the sword. With a steadfast face facing the storm, he thought, it's not about worrying that the Baskerville territory will be destroyed. The real concern is that the Allied forces can't possibly stand against that monster, especially since it hasn't shown its full power yet. Viker recalled the cold face of the homeowner, Hugo, and told himself, however, this is a good opportunity for me. If I pretend to be dead, I can escape Hugo's surveillance and have more time to study and memorize the 10th ultimate skill. Once I have enough ability to break free from Hugo's control, or when I finish mastering the skills to hide and manage them, I will return to my family. With that thought, he summoned Beelzebub into his hand, transforming it into a sharp sword. He stood still, waiting for Madame Eight Legs to come closer, reminding himself, if I don't use everything I have, I will definitely die. Viker felt the surge of energy coursing through his body and thought, I've received a significant amount of mana thanks to the blessing of the river Styx. I will use all my aura along with the advanced swordsmanship of the Baskerville family, especially the demonic sword Beelzebub, to attack it. Having made his decision, he opened his eyes wide, ready for battle. Viker leaped from tree to tree, moving with a speed far beyond that of an ordinary person. A shockwave erupted as he jumped high into the air, facing the monster directly. Madame Eight Legs let out a growl, revealing its sharp, menacing teeth. Viker coldly raised his hand. The blood-red blade followed suit. Suddenly, a bright light erupted from the sword, enveloping Viker before he quickly shot towards the monster. Viker unleashed the 5th technique of the Baskerville clan, landing a decisive blow to Madame Eight Legs' head. He gritted his teeth, enduring the force of the attack. The monster's legs shook as it struggled to withstand his strike. But unfortunately, power behind the technique was too strong. Madame Eight Legs' body sank deep, leaving only a glimmer of red light. The crimson light spread around, shooting straight up into the sky. Adolf and the others, who had run ahead, could only suppress their tears and keep moving. Camus stood frozen, unable to believe her eyes as she witnessed the scene. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her voice trembled as she called out, "No, Viker." Camus screamed his name in despair. The pillar of light slowly faded away. The scene from a past life flashed before Viker's eyes. That day, he knelt on the ground, flanked by guards with their swords drawn. He waited, expecting to lose his head. Viker's face darkened. Slowly, he opened his eyes, revealing his fiery red gaze. The night sky was softly illuminated by the moonlight. An old man stood calmly nearby, followed by a mighty army. It was none other than Hugo. The old man raised his hand, his eyes glowing red, just like Viker's. Coldly, decisively, he lowered his hand to signal the execution. Viker's vision immediately began to whirl. He even just became hazy, the red hue gradually clouding his sight. He watched as Hugo turned away, showing no concern for his own son. Following the old man's retreating figure, Viker silently thought, so, this is it, Hugo. Viker slowly opened his eyes, breaking free from that dream. The rough straw thatch of the ceiling came into view. He lay on the floor, his body covered in wounds, with his neck tightly bound by ropes. Confused, he asked, where am I? Then he recalled the memories before he fainted and wondered, wait, how many days have passed? Did I survive the battle with Madame Eight Legs? Images of himself battling the monster flashed through Viker's mind. He thought to himself, if she hadn't suddenly stopped because of the blinding explosion, I would have been dead. Viker struggled to sit up. He rubbed his aching shoulder and mused, bones, muscles, and even blood vessels. There's not a single part of me that doesn't hurt. One blow, and I'm this wounded. I really underestimated her. Damn it. At that moment, Viker realized the rope tightly wrapped around his neck. He felt a twinge of confusion, thinking, is this why my neck hurts? Did this thing save my life? He recalled the 3 people, Adolf, and reassured himself, everything is going according to my plan, right? First, I escaped Hugo's watchful eyes, besides Adolf and Camus, and there were many witnesses, so I don't need to worry about my death. Viker pushed aside the curtain and stepped out of the tent. Seeing the Black Tribe members going about their daily lives, he wondered, is this the Black Camp? Am I being held hostage here? This thought crossed his mind as he observed the black people around him. Viker felt a rush of concern. He was standing right in the middle of the enemy camp of the Baskerville clan. This was bad. There was no way he could escape in his current weakened state. Suddenly, a group of people shouted from behind him, hurry up! A girl named Black was tying up several strong men with ropes, and she was angrily yelling, if you don't want to get eaten by wolves, move it. Recognizing those familiar faces, Viker quickly realized they were soldiers from Baskerville and other clans who had been captured. How do I know them? Viker wondered. And why am I not being executed like the others? Out of the blue, a voice rang out, awake, are you? Ahan, having cut his hair, now appeared more handsome in a certain way. He asked Viker, do you understand Black? Viker felt a pang of suspicion. This guy reminds me of the one who tried to ambush me last time. An, with an air of arrogance, said, you should be grateful that you're not like them. He leaned in closer to Viker and taunted, how does it feel to watch your teammates die while you stand there helpless in that sorry state? An's eyes revealed a twisted smile, and his words were no different. If you weren't Chai Hui's obedient dog, I would have killed you by now. Viker only focused on the phrase obedient dog. He recalled how Hugo had chained him up much like a dog. Aham sensed something was off and wondered, huh? What's wrong with his eyes? At that moment, Viker's eyes blazed red, filled with years of accumulated killing intent. This made Aham look down on him. Without hesitation, he punched Viker in the face and cursed, "You arrogant bastard." Aham walked away, leaving Viker trembling on the ground with his injury. He muttered, "Don't just stand there. Go find your owner at the end of the leash." Indeed, Viker was harboring a grudge. He glared at Aham's retreating figure and reminded himself, "I'll remember your face. When I recover, you'll pay." The atmosphere in the Black Tribe was very calm. Viker followed the long leash as he left the village. He wondered, why is this leash so long? Viker was getting a bit impatient, wondering, we've been walking for a while now, but where's my master at the end of this line? Suddenly, the rope went taut. Viker looked on in surprise. The rope was connected to the girl lying in the water across from him. Aya remained calm and silent as she floated in the pond. The two exchanged glances without saying a word. Then Ayan suddenly smiled and commanded him, "Lie down." When Viker didn't immediately comply, Ayan quickly pulled on the rope. Fortunately, Viker grabbed onto the rope, avoiding getting soaked like a drenched rat, though he did bend down a bit. Just then, an arrow whizzed past where he had been standing and lodged into a nearby tree. Feeling helpless, Viker lay on the ground, listening to Ayan scolding the kids from her tribe for their reckless behavior, saying, "You boys go practice somewhere else." Once that was settled, Ayan turned to him and said, "Thank you for letting me go at the slave auction." With confidence, she declared, "We always repay double and settle scores tenfold. Since you saved me once, I'll save you twice." Viker was confused and asked, "Twice, huh?" Ayan proudly explained, "I'm back. If I hadn't come, you would have been done for. You should be grateful for my stubbornness." Viker didn't seem to care. He held up the rope around his neck and asked, "Did you tie this?" When Viker questioned, "Why keep me alive?" Ayan just smiled. She tugged gently on the rope and said, "Looks like you have a pretty important position with those guys. I wonder how much they pay to get you back." Ayan casually threw that out there. Viker felt a knot of tension in his stomach. He thought, if they want to negotiate a ransom with the Baskerville family, then my plan to escape Hugo's watch will probably be in trouble. What should I do now? As Viker was deep in thought, Ayan let out a light laugh. She slyly asked, "Hey, what are you thinking? Do you see a glimmer of hope? Too bad, you won't be going back there." With that, she pulled out a knife and cut the rope from around his neck, calmly declaring, "You're going to be my slave now." At this, Viker let out a quiet sigh of relief. The energetic girl stood confidently in the sunlight and said, "How about we decide what to call each other first? You can call me Master." Viker remained silent and cold. Ayan seemed to have anticipated this and laughed, saying, "Ha ha, I like that defiant look in your eyes. I will tame you." After saying this, she turned around and added, "But first, we have a place to go. Let's go." Viker, curious, asked, "Where to?" Ayan smiled and replied, "What do you mean? Isn't it obvious? When entering someone else's territory, you should greet them first." A hut appeared before them, with an arrow embedded in the head of a fearsome monster. Ayan continued, "We are going to visit the village chief." As she spoke, the figure of a really cool woman appeared. She was surrounded by countless monster corpses. Viker, with his upper body bandaged and battered, walked alongside Ayan, observing their surroundings. She said, "If we can't find a place to sleep, we can crash on a friend's hammock." The scene was truly peaceful. Some people were resting, while others were happily playing with friends, enjoying fruits in their hands. She continued, "And if you get hungry, you can take food from those who are wealthier. That's how we, the black people, live together." Ayan smiled brightly at him, her eyes wide with surprise as she said, "To outsiders, it may not seem like much, but to us, this place is our simple, unadorned home. If you can get used to life here, that would be great." Viker focused ahead and remarked, "It seems like the black people don't have the concept of private property, do they?" She looked ahead happily and replied, "We've arrived." He turned to look and was amazed as Ayan introduced, "This is the tent of the Lady Chief." Ahead, they saw a large tent surrounded by wooden poles. 2 skulls hung from wooden poles near the entrance, looking quite eerie. They stepped into the tent. Ayan led the way, cheerfully calling out, "Mom, we're here." Viker lifted the flap and thought in surprise, "Mom." A woman gradually stood up and asked, "You're here already?" She continued, "You bring the young man you always talk about." Ayan clasped her hands together and, feeling embarrassed, exclaimed, "Ma, I never said that." Viker stayed silent, looking at the mother and daughter confused. Viker thought to himself, so she's the daughter of the chiefess of the Black Tribe, so she is the Night Fox. He stared in astonishment at Ayan's mother. Her long hair covered half her face, and her fit body only added to her allure and authority. Her features were even more exaggerated. The Black Warrior had left a scar on Hugo's nose. I couldn't get past the scenery of Leroy Leno because of her. I wonder what it would be like if my past self faced her. Viker envisioned himself wielding a sword against her, but in a direct confrontation, his chances were zero. She would kick him in the face, sending his sword flying. If he tried to assassinate her, his chances were still zero. The Night Fox would shoot hidden weapons straight in with her bow. These were the images Viker had been mulling over in silence. He pictured the Night Fox, her anger blazing and her sharp eyes scanning him, and couldn't help but think, what if I ran? That would give me only a 20% chance of survival. The Night Fox looked at him in surprise, stroking her chin as she said, I've seen that face before. Viker worriedly observed and thought, could she really instinctively recognize that he shares blood with Hugo? She closed her eyes, filled with disdain, and said, well, what nobleman doesn't look similar to others? Aquila put her hands on her hips, turned to her daughter, and asked, what are you planning to do with this guy? He looks no different from a cripple. Aeon pointed towards him, excitedly replying, once this guy recovers, he'll be useful. After all, he's the one who defeated Madame Eight Legs. Aquila still seemed skeptical about his abilities, so she reminded her daughter, acting without considering your own status can lead to trouble for you. Aquila then seemed to have a different thought and casually looked at him, saying, well, whether he's disabled or not doesn't really matter as long as he's a good seed. Aeon waved her hand, panicking, and replied, oh no, Mom, that's not what I meant. I was planning to make him a slave. Ignoring the discussion they were having about him, Viker focused intently on the tree in front of him. Aquila responded in surprise, huh? You didn't say that last time. Aeon shyly shouted, it's only reasonable to have a slave assist me while hunting. Her mother gently patted her daughter's head and replied, all right, then it's up to you how to handle the slave. Aeon looked down, embarrassed, and then glanced at Viker, who was observing the tree by touching its trunk. Outside, the sunlight filtered through the leaves, making the atmosphere here wonderfully peaceful. As the two of them stepped out of the tent, someone suddenly spoke up. I want to ask you something. He looked at her and asked, what's your name? Aeon was taken aback and snapped. How rude. A slave daring to ask that. Viker replied with disdain, I'm not going to call you mistress, so just tell me your name. Feeling shy, she rubbed her neck and said, it's Aeon. He looked at her and said, my name is Viker. So what do you want me to do from now on, Aeon? She gasped in surprise and angrily said, how can a slave be so bold as to call their mistress by name? Aeon then gave him a sly look and declared, fine, I'll give you your first task. She stood before him, pointed at his face and commanded, build a house. Build a house for yourself to live in from now on. Aeon stroked her chin, smiling with satisfaction as she thought, humph, just an ordinary slave daring to act so arrogantly. Noblemen probably don't even know how to build a house. She silently decided, commanding a slave is part of a master's skill. I need to take this opportunity to show them the clear class divide between us. Viker rubbed his chin, mumbling, building a house, huh? Suddenly, he grinned and said, this will be interesting. Aeon looked at him in surprise. In front of her, Viker stood next to a newly erected tent. He pointed at it and said, I've completed your command. Aeon gazed at the tent, secretly amazed. How did this guy build a tent so well? I thought he'd struggle since he's injured. She glanced behind her at the bag she held containing supplies for setting up the tent and thought, it looks like all this stuff I brought won't even be needed now. He smiled, thinking, it's been a long time. During the era of destruction, swordsmen who only knew how to wield their swords certainly had a tough time surviving. Aeon reflected on the image of himself in a black cloak, sitting by a fire to keep warm. To survive in such harsh conditions, it was obvious that learning many survival skills was essential. Aeon knelt down on one leg. She reached toward the freshly dug earth, admiring it, and said, the drainage ditch looks perfect too. Viker suddenly leaned over and replied, oh, that reminds me, I saw that the queen's tent doesn't seem very stable. Aeon slowly stood up, shocked, and asked, huh, you mean my mother's? He nodded and said, yeah, with the rainy season coming soon, the breaks around the central pole of the tent could easily crack or rot. Water will leak inside. If you allow it, I'll mix in some crushed rocks, clay, and gravel from the other side of the hill to make bricks. I'll also reinforce the tent poles by applying tree resin and heating it over a fire to set. Aeon was astonished and couldn't believe it, hesitating before responding, okay, I was thinking the same thing. She hid behind a tree trunk, watching Viker get to work. He poured the materials into a basin to mix the bricks. As dusk began to fall, the two sat next to each other, focused on the fire that was hardening the bricks. After finishing their project, Viker loaded a cart full of bricks and returned with Aeon. She happily approached her mother to show off their work. After a while of putting effort into fixing the hut, Aquila looked up in amazement. The three of them gazed at the tree trunk that Viker had recently worked on, which was now reinforced with a sturdy brick frame. The beams of the hut were also covered with tree sap, making them appear very solid. Aquila looked at the tree trunk and said, I've been struggling with this problem for ages. No matter how many times I've fixed it, the roof kept leaking. So the issue was with the beams, huh? She smiled at him and praised, well done. It seems my daughter has brought home quite a useful young man. They both fell silent as she commanded, from now on, you should walk around the camp and take care of chores like this. The next day, while he was bent over washing clothes by the stream, someone called out, Hey! He looked up in surprise and asked, What? The person approaching was Anne. She stood with her hands on her hips and asked him, Aren't you tired from all this hard work? Don't you want to become an official member of our tribe? Viker held his shirt to dry and replied, Not really. Labor isn't that bad. He thought to himself, This is still more peaceful than living in the Baskerville house or in Underdog City. Anne looked surprised and said, With the way you speak, it seems you've been well educated. Well, I guess it makes sense that a slave wouldn't dare complain. Viker quickly clarified, No, I genuinely don't think it's that bad. She didn't believe him and shot back, There's no way being ordered around and doing all the hard work isn't exhausting. As he carried a basin of items away, she hurried after him, urging, Don't be like that. Come with me, and I'll help you. I'll help you get used to life and survive in the tribe. Viker turned to her and said, If you do a good job, I might even take that robe off you. Sounds tempting, doesn't it? He asked. So what do I need to do? Anne got the answer she wanted, rubbed her chin, and grinned, saying, Being honest like that is definitely better, right? They walked toward a large tree standing in the middle of the path, its trunk covered with animal bones. She said, You should go hunt and bring back a big animal. Viker was surprised and asked, Hunting? She immediately explained, Lately, the warriors of the tribe haven't been able to catch large game often, so the kids in our clan haven't had much meat to eat. A picture of a rabbit hanging his bait among countless arms flashed in her mind. The two walked and talked. Anne, with her hands behind her head, replied enthusiastically, In other words, if you can bring back a big animal, then getting rid of your slave label won't be such a distant dream anymore. Excited, she playfully slapped his back and said, And it seems like you can carry light things now, right? So you just need to help me, and Viker, because of that sudden hit, gritted his teeth against the pain. He pouted, clearly unhappy with her comment. You should feel grateful to be a slave of the tribe's hunting chief, he said awkwardly. All right then, let's go. Anne looked at him in surprise. Huh? Then she smiled so widely that her cheeks turned pink, revealing her fangs. The two continued walking toward the supplies. She waved her hand, suggesting, Let's set off tomorrow. Viker, holding a basket of supplies, replied, Sure, but why are you so cheerful? Anne bashfully shouted, I'm not. Two people were happily chatting, unaware that someone was hiding behind a tree, listening to them. He clenched his teeth in anger and glanced at the two of them. He looked at the two who were joking around and muttered through gritted teeth, Disgusting bastards. A hand reached into a jar and slowly lifted something that looked like paper mixed with ash. It turned out to be the shaman, a human. He raised his ash-covered hand and said, Alright, hunters, gather round. It's time for the welcoming ceremony. Everyone lined up in front of him. A human sat at the front and pointed ahead, saying, Receive my blessing or you won't find any peace. Anne explained to him, Black hunters feel guilty after killing their prey, so before they make the kill, they apply this to their faces to hide from death. Viker stood behind, amazed, thinking, So even the Black warrior tribe has a shaman. She, with her bow and arrows, disdainfully remarked, He's talking nonsense again. The awkward guy standing beside them replied, Just ignore him. The teacher has to show a little authority too. The girl questioned, but hasn't his blessing failed many times? They watched as he happily smeared mud on each person's face and said, That's why we only come to receive his blessings occasionally. Viker, overhearing the conversation, thought, Is she saying he's useless? This place doesn't seem much different from others. A while later, Anne received her blessing. He smeared a circle around her mouth, added 3 lines on her forehead like a worm, and darkened her eyelids, making her look lifeless. Viker pointed at her and said, Looks good. Anne got so angry she could almost steam, wiping the marks on her face and retorted, Shut up. He and I don't get along. Feeling a bit shy, she held out a collar in front of him, saying, You should wear this. He took the collar, confused, and asked, A dog collar? Anne, putting on another collar herself, replied, We wear this so the prey won't bite our necks. Viker touched the collar he was wearing, pondering. Since I'm here, I might as well blend in. A gray wolf appeared in front of them, its tongue lolling out. Anne and he were sitting on its back. She turned her head and said, I told you to hold on to me. Are you sure you'll be okay? Viker replied confidently, I'll be fine. Anne said, Then let's go. With a swift motion, the gray wolf took off running. He leaned back, dazed, feeling the rush of the ride. Suddenly, Anne looked back at him, grinning triumphantly. It turned out Viker had fallen to the ground. She laughed mockingly, saying, "You were supposed to hold on to me. Serves you right." He lay on the ground, feeling embarrassed, thinking, "I'm so sore. Should I get up?" Just then, a shadow passed overhead, blocking the sun. Viker looked up in surprise. It was another member of the tribe, a muscular man marked with swirling tattoos on his arms. He was probably out hunting too, as he wore a necklace and carried a bow, along with another wolf. Ayan touched her mount and looked at the newcomer, saying, "On." He frowned and replied, "You're quite the idle one. Playing around with a slave again, huh?" Viker sat on the ground, watching Avan swagger over to her and say, "This time, I'm going to catch a bigger prey. So for our next hunt together, I'll be the team leader. I'll make him proud." Ayan seemed too familiar with his personality. She scoffed and asked, "How can you act so important when your grandfather is a teacher too?" Suddenly, someone approached him. It was On, who, out of anger, kicked Viker right in the side. Ayan looked at him in shock. She shouted, "You bastard, what are you doing?" Seeing Viker curled up on the ground in pain, Avan sneered and said, "You're actually letting this injured guy be your sidekick." Ayan's eyes widened in surprise as she heard him. She challenged him, "Why would you let a guy like that be your assistant? Think about it, Commander. He's only going to drag you down." She taunted him back. "Well, maybe you should check your own belt before you start talking." Avan looked down in disbelief. "What? His belt is tied up tight with a golden cord." Viker spat out blood and emitted some mocking sounds. Sitting on the ground, clutching his quiver, he smugly remarked, "You have to handle your weapons with care, just like your loved one." Avan opened his eyes wide in fear, unable to speak. He teased, "Watch out, you might get robbed." Avan grit his teeth in anger and turned his head back to him. He covered his mouth, acting surprised. Without hesitation, Ahan swung his fist and charged at him, shouting, "You insolent slave." Suddenly, a bow struck against his hand and a voice said, "That's enough." Ayan held the bow, frowning as she asked, "Do you really think you're causing trouble for someone else's slave?" Ahan shouted back in anger, "He's just a slave. How dare he insult a black warrior?" Ayan frowned and replied, "You were the one being rude first. He wouldn't back down and growl, 'He's still a slave. Why are you protecting him?'" Then he looked at her and guessed, "Don't tell me you have feelings for him." Ayan stayed silent, not answering. She slapped her hand, her forehead, and sighed. "All right, a slave is a slave, and if he messes up, he gets punished." Avan nodded in satisfaction, saying, "Yeah, that's right." Viker sat on the ground, quietly listening as Ayan defended him. "But you don't have the right to punish him. He's my slave." Without a word, she rushed in and punched Viker in the face, causing him to spit blood and fall to the ground. Ahan stared in shock. Ayan walked over to where he had fallen and turned to ask, "Are you satisfied now?" She tightly gripped his bloody hand and said, "I know you're unhappy because you didn't catch any girls." Ayan radiated an overpowering aura. Her face was filled with a threatening intensity as she warned, "But if you pull any dirty tricks with my slave, I will kill you. Do you understand?" Ahan widened his eyes in fear as he looked at the exhausted man lying on the ground and replied, "Yeah." After a moment, sunlight streamed into the forest. Ayan walked ahead, glancing over with concern while Viker remained blank and expressionless. The two mounted the wolf and headed towards the hunting area. She asked from the front, "Doesn't hurt? Are you angry?" He remained silent, not responding. Guilt washed over her as she turned to explain, "I had to do it. Ahan is really petty and stubborn. I had to do this to keep him from causing trouble." But he still seemed lost in thought. Ayan worriedly asked, "Why won't you answer me?" She opened her eyes wide, astonished to hear him say, "It hurts so much." Suddenly, Ayan flipped upside down and jumped up. She cupped his cheeks, leaning in close to ask, "Are you about to die?" Ayan was still tightly holding Viker's cheeks, and he struggled to reply, "Talking is really painful." Out of nowhere, she leaned in and kissed his cheek, saying, "I've been hurt so much already." Viker was taken aback, staring at her in disbelief. After a moment, the sunlight flooded through the forest. Ayan returned to her original position on the wolf's back. Feeling embarrassed, she touched her lips, lost in thought. Noticing that he had climbed onto the wolf's back, she felt her cheeks flush. Ayan complimented herself, her ears burning red with embarrassment, saying, "I knew I was right. You have a lot of potential, even coming from an empire." Viker squinted and wiped the spot she had just kissed, wondering silently, do they always lick each other's wounds? That's really risky. What if it gets infected? Blushing, she turned to ask, "Is there anything you want from me? Just tell me. If I can do it, I will." He responded, "Can I ask for this?" She jumped slightly, stuttering her response. Of course, the black warrior never goes back on their word. He held his chin deep in thought. Ayan in front felt embarrassed, her face turning red. She worriedly wondered, what is he thinking so hard about? It can't be. After a moment of contemplation, he said, "If it's anything, Then I guess this would be good. Ayan turned to look at him, and Viker seriously said, "Teach me how to shoot a bow." She replied, a bit bored, "Sure, shooting arrows is fine." The two of them rode their mount deeper into the forest. She happily laughed. "Ha ha, then from tomorrow, we'll have special training." He answered, "Sure." The next day, both of them entered the woods to practice. An arrow embedded itself into the trunk of a tree, joining many others already stuck there. A voice called out, "Oh dear, my slave doesn't know how to shoot a bow. Didn't I tell you to aim at the arrow that's already there?" Viker looked over, gritting his teeth, and nervously asked, "Do we really have to do this standing position?" It turned out she was hugging one side of his body to give instructions. She responded with a cheerful smile, "Didn't you ask me to teach you how to shoot? Kids in black are all taught like this." Ayan adjusted his back and said, "You won't be able to use a sword because your body is too weak for a long time, so you should learn to shoot a bow. You need to catch a large prey to restore your honor. Bend a little more." Viker raised the bow, gritted his teeth, and thought, "My bones have reached their limit." Suddenly, a wolf appeared behind them. Ayan noticed it and turned her head to look at it. She tightened her grip around him. Viker felt as if his bones were shattering under this pressure. Ignoring his trembling back, she approached the wolf and asked, "Bakira, have you found it?" The wolf howled, which served as an answer. Seeing him gritting his teeth until his face turned pale, she said, "Stand up." She was smiling from above and added, "From now on, we're going to move quickly." They walked to a spot where a stream flowed gently through the forest. She observed the area and explained, "This is where the river meets the sea, so it's full of seawater and marine life." She told me this: salmon believe that if they swim upstream, they can transform into giant monsters. Images of fish swimming frantically filled her mind. They leaped and played on the surface of the water, but most of them failed and fell onto the jagged rocks below. This image kept replaying in her thoughts. Sharp stones pierced the delicate skin of these small creatures. When they died, they wouldn't even be able to close their eyes. They would become a meal for the ox bear, a massive beast with two fierce horns on its head. Two people were hidden behind the bushes watching. Viker was confused and asked, "Is that an ox bear? It doesn't look like anything we've seen before." She replied, "That's not an ordinary ox bear." A recalled its savage face, distinct from others of its kind, and explained, "That's a superior specimen that has survived through much chaos." He looked at her skeptically and asked, "So, do you want us to catch it?" Ayan answered, "No way. I didn't ask Bakira to find such a strong female for us to catch." Suddenly, a large foot from a creature approached. She said, "Our target is the males trying to mate with this female." In front of them were ox bears intensely watching. Their gazes were unusually sharp. Another one, marked with a stain on its head, was breathing heavily, full of spirit, staring ahead. Opposite it was another ox bear brimming with energy. The two immediately charged at each other to attack. Viker was amazed to see the female using her claws to slap the other one on the head. She continued to attack, leaving her opponent unable to counter. The two observers had been watching when Viker, astonished, asked, "Why doesn't that female accept it? How strong does she want her mate to be?" Ayan smirked and replied, "You're thinking about it the wrong way. It's the opposite." Viker looked confused. They continued to watch the fight, and she explained, "The female isn't looking for a strong male. She was just nuzzling with another ox bear." Viker, puzzled, asked her, "So she's choosing the weakest one?" Ayan watched them with excitement and answered, "She's looking for a partner she can dominate." She thought of it like human love, where the man often holds more power. When strong males get excited, they even harm their partners, so they aren't very welcomed. That's why females prefer to find a mate that is smaller and weaker. She turned to him, smiling as she said, "It's just like the way a black warrior chooses a mate. Do you even know what type of person is usually picked?" She continued, "A young one with good genes. It's even better if they're weakened by an injury." Viker sat on the ground, pouting, thinking that jealousy was the only important factor. The two ox bears, which had just bumped noses, moved further into the forest. Ayan spoke with an air of mystery. "Now we need to wait. The females will completely dominate the strength of the males." The next day, deep in the woods, the sounds of roaring echoed everywhere. Viker, feeling drained, wandered around. He paused in front of a cave where the roars continued to resonate from deep within. "I've been standing here listening to these bears groan for 4 days now, and I have no idea what I'm doing anymore." There was a spot filled with delicious food, including fish and fruits. Ayan, full of energy, put her hands on her hips and asked, "Have you left any food for them?" Viker turned and replied he realized he had been providing food for those bears for the past 4 days so they could continue mating. Ayan held a tiny purple fruit in his hand. He said, "This fruit can temporarily enhance strength, but it's not good because it will affect longevity. Smarter offspring will understand our intentions. The males will also get it, but they have no choice but to eat it to satisfy the females. In his mind, he pictured a girl who always had to be cautious around the strength of men. He understood why she chose a very strong female. It was to reduce the male's power as much as possible. On the ground, 2 steaming bowls of soup appeared. She said, "Here." Watching Viker hold the bowl, she cheerfully urged, "Eat up so your wounds heal quickly." He sighed, "Anyways, they really are mating like crazy." Aiden casually replied, "Isn't that normal?" At her question, he managed to take a sip of soup, but ended up coughing it all out. Aiden laughed mischievously, covering her mouth as she asked, "Are all the black men like that? How about the men from the Empire? Coming from such a boring place, I bet you can't handle it. Can you do it?" Viker wiped his mouth and listened quietly as she asked. She knelt on the ground, striking a provocative pose as she asked, "Ready?" Suddenly, as if sensing something approaching, Aiden's eyes widened in surprise. She cautiously glanced behind her, her hand gripping her bow and arrow as she said, "Get ready." Viker, completely confused, stared at her with wide eyes. He looked at the sight of the red-pink ox bear collapse on the ground while the brown one seemed full of energy. He guessed that the female must be pregnant. The brown one suddenly became angry and let out a fierce growl. The red ox bear emerged from its den. The 2 of them had climbed up a tree at some point and were watching from above. He asked in confusion, "Why is it chasing a male away?" Aiden replied, "A male ox bear that has just mated is like an intruder in its territory. It's warning that one never return again." He glanced at her and remarked, "Probably sleepy after using all its energy and hasn't slept in 4 days." Aiden met his gaze and said, "It will hide somewhere safe and far away. From here, we will quietly follow its trail." Viker remained silent, watching Aiden smile triumphantly as she said, "When it sleeps, that's when we'll start our hunt." In the chilling, snowy mountains, a creature with fur as white as snow is moving. It's carrying a person on its back, slowly making its way through a snowy canyon. It turns out to be Viker and Aiden. He sits behind her, complaining wearily, "We've come too far." She tilts her head and replies, "It's looking for the safest path. It's really cold here, so mosquitoes can't survive." He asked in surprise, "Didn't know that's why it came here?" Aiden closes her eyes and smiles as she answers, "Ox bear's intelligence is actually quite high. Its knowledge goes beyond just animal instincts." He sits behind her, shivering and hugging himself, muttering, "Man, I'm really cold." Aiden feels him trembling and leans her head to ask, "Cold? If you're cold, come closer to me." Viker gently declines, "No, I'm fine." She puts on a serious face and says, "If your body temperature drops, you'll stiffen up. If you stiffen up, it'll affect me when I'm hunting. Do you want to affect me?" He pauses thoughtfully. That's a solid reason. She could come up with such a logical argument. After considering it for a moment, Viker finally replies, "All right, fine." He then moved closer, wrapping his arms around Aiden in a warm embrace. She was so surprised that her face turned red. Embarrassed, she justified her feelings to herself, thinking, "I'm just worried about the slave's health. As a master, I have to take care of my slave." Suddenly, the beast seemed to sense something. Its face slowly twisted into a snarl, and its bright eyes glowed with anger. It growled ferociously. Aiden gasped and shouted, "Bakira!" In front of them lay the fading tracks of a creature, slowly disappearing as they continued on. Aiden shouted in astonishment, "The tracks have vanished." She looked around, asking, "Where did it go?" But no one realized that what they were looking for was hiding a small crevice of the snowy mountain, watching their every move with piercing eyes. Out of nowhere, the creature in the crevice started to move closer to Aiden. She felt its footsteps and in shock glanced at the massive ox bear with 2 horns, its mouth open, eagerly charging toward her. Onlookers gathered around, excitedly watching the scene unfold. They cheered with delight at the sight of a wild boar covered in arrows lying on a cart, exclaiming, "Wow, look at that wild boar." 2 people in front chatted happily. "With this much meat, our whole tribe could feast heartily." The girl said, "I only caught 3 rabbits." The guy next to her praised, "That wild boar is the best catch around here, right, Ahun?" It turned out the one who had caught that big beast was the arrogant guy who had shown disdain for Viker. He stood with his hands on his hips, grinning proudly at everyone. The girl next to him asked, "So from now on, will Ahun be the leader of the hunting party?" The guy replied, "Yeah, according to the rules. That's how it works. Even if Ayan is talented, there are some things she can't manage." Ahun, encouraged by this praise, puffed his chest out, laughing mockingly as he said, "Ha! Isn't she bringing a slave along? Humph! That guy is just a burden, not helpful at all. What? Is she going to come back empty-handed?" An enraged ox bear charged forward, its mouth wide open, ready to attack. Ayan stared in shock, and suddenly she felt a strong arm wrap around her. The fierce creature swung its claws to strike. Viker, putting all his strength into it, gritted his teeth and pulled Ayan aside, narrowly avoiding the attack. Suddenly, Ayan stared in shock at what had just appeared before her. It turned out to be a gray wolf. The two of them had fallen to the ground, and he was still holding Ayan tightly. The wolf's eyes glimmered fiercely as it growled aggressively at its opponent. Then it opened its mouth wide and lunged at the oxbear. Viker looked down at Ayan, still lying on him, and asked, "Are you okay?" Ayan replied coolly, "Thanks to you, I just escaped death, so I appreciate it." Watching the oxbear and the gray wolf continuously growling and attacking each other, Viker wondered aloud, is it trying to lure us into something? He then answered his own question. It's smarter than the others. Now I see why the females choose it. Viker stood up, glanced at the chaos, and said, I think we might be in for a fierce battle. Ayan, still behind him, rubbed her chin and thought, did I just get helped by a slave and I'm supposed to be his master? Isn't that ironic? Suddenly she shocked him with her words, my slave, step back and rest behind me. Ayan, full of energy, said, I will show you the dignity of a true master. He responded, confused, are you telling me to rest? Viker hid behind a rock, watching as the wolf kept jumping up towards her and said, the servant rests, but the master works. He sighed, this tribe is really something special. Ayan rode the wolf, having just chased after a fierce ox bear. She drew her bow and aimed carefully. A flurry of arrows pierced its skin. Furious, Ayan shouted, how dare you act defiantly in front of my servant? You'll pay for this. The ox bear suddenly moved, hiding behind a rock. Sitting on the wolf, Ayan aimed her bow at it. She frowned and said, do you think hiding behind that rock will protect you from my arrows? Her whole body radiated a formidable power. Filled with determination, Ayan declared, a good arrow, when it's needed, can pierce through steel. But when it's not the right moment, even a small leaf won't cause harm. Whoosh! An arrow flew towards the rock, hitting its target squarely, piercing the back of the ox bear. It cried out in pain, its eyes blood red with fury. Viker was amazed as he thought that ox bear hiding behind the rock was hit by an arrow. He watched in astonishment as the arrow seemed to shift on its own. The aura from the arrow pierced through the rock and struck the target precisely. He observed Ayan's silhouette and silently admired. Her archery technique could be called a penetrating attack. That hunting skill could take down anyone without hint of error. Ayan grinned proudly, showing her teeth, and thought, see that, slave. Viker mentally compared, in terms of skill, she's far better than Camus Moore. Blood from the ox bear dripped onto the ground. The fierce ox bear that had been so ferocious earlier now had its mouth covered in blood and was panting heavily. It seemed to regain its strength and charged out from behind the rock to attack her again. Ayan, perched on her wolf, quickly fired 2 arrows at it. You think you can withstand my arrows? She said. With an air of menace, Ayan drew back her bow and added, these arrows carry my very spirit. As if turning into another person, her whole body along with the bow and arrow radiated vibrant blue energy. She said, and break down the walls of that castle. Then she released the arrow, sending it flying toward the target. The ox bear, with only one bloodshot eye, panted heavily as it stared at her. Suddenly, its gaze sharpened. Swiftly, the arrow zipped past its body, striking a rock behind it and sending fragments flying. Ayan watched in astonishment. The ox bear charged right at the wolf. The impact was so strong that she lost her balance and fell to the ground, tumbling away from the force. After rolling for a while, she ended up face down on the ground. Ayan squinted and thought, remembering her mother's words, when a monster is close to death, all its hatred focuses on one person. She realized I was careless. I cornered it and thought shooting the final arrow was the right choice. Grinding her teeth, Ayan pushed herself up to stand. When did the ox bear get so close to her, it opened its mouth wide and roared. Ayan gritted her teeth and narrowed her eyes, cursing, damn it. Suddenly a voice echoed, have you shown me your master's dignity yet? Ayan froze, astonished by the voice. Her eyes were still glistening with tears, thinking this would be her last moment. Then she felt a strong arm wrap around her waist. Viker stood proudly before her, ready to fight the fierce beast. His eyes were fiery and intense as he declared, now it's my turn. With that, Viker launched a powerful strike straight at the mouth of the ox bear in front of him. He moved with agility, performing intricate moves, then jumped up and unleashed a forceful blow to the creature, causing it to explode. Ayan, sitting on the ground, watched in awe, fire. The once ferocious beast was now charred and defeated. It let out a few final growls as flames consumed the bandages on Viker, setting them fluttering in the wind. At that moment, Viker looked like a true hero. Ayan blushed as she gazed at him. I knew you could do it. Suddenly, his body wobbled, swaying unsteadily, and his gaze began to blur. He struggled to speak, realizing that using that skill had pushed his body beyond its limits. After that, he fell face first into the ground. Ayan panicked and reached out to call for Viker. The ox bear had also sunk deep into sleep, its body charred black. That evening, inside the forest, lights twinkled in the tribal area. Everyone was busy preparing a grand feast to celebrate the big victory of the day. Some were carrying dishes of food, while others gathered around the fire, dancing and cheering. They exchanged the best bowls of food with great respect. A voice announced, "The hunter who catches the biggest prey will earn the respect and admiration of the villagers." It turned out to be Ian's voice. Two people wearing masks on their heads looked quite funny. She pointed at him and asked, "How does it feel to be a hero?" Viker replied casually, "It's pretty normal." She criticized him, saying, "You're so lackluster, slave. That's your problem." She explained the ox bear isn't just strong, it's also very smart, so catching it is a big honor. That's why we were chosen to represent our tribe during this pillaging ceremony. Its head was hanging from a tree trunk ready to be roasted, and Ian laughed, saying, "Unlike a slow, scared wild pig that just runs away squealing." She smirked at the person in front of her and asked, "Right, Ahun?" He gritted his teeth in anger and shot her an annoyed look, mumbling just to acknowledge her. Ian handed over a steaming bowl of soup and said, "This one's yours, slave." Viker looked at her with disgust and asked, "What's this?" Ahun, furious, raised his fist and demanded, "What do you mean by that, you slave?" Viker asked, "Why don't I get more meat?" He seemed really angry and replied, "Because you're only worth that much." As Ahun stormed off, grumbling, Ian, pleased with herself, laughed and said, "It's a tradition of the Black Tribe. The one who contributes the most to the hunt gets the least meat, but gains the most honor." Ahun walked away muttering, "Damn it, I wish I could give you more meat." Viker pondered over his bowl of soup, thinking, so less meat equals more honor, huh? But meat is definitely worth more than that useless honor. Ian chuckled, looking at him and said, "Hey, that jerk Ahun must be really mad with that face of his." Viker still felt resentful about his soup portion. He finally accepted in his heart, "Well, getting meat isn't the goal of this hunt for me." He remembered his goal, which was the 600 kilograms weight he would receive from Beelzebub after capturing the ox bear. Viker's hands showed red lines and annotations appeared above them. Position 1. Burn injury Cerberus, a plus, fire damage, hurting to inflict harm. Position 2. Kilogram hammer ox bear A as strong as an ox bear. Position 3. Kilogram hammer ox bear A. He thought in amazement, will my body get 600 kilograms heavier if I hold my breath? Viker was sipping a bowl of soup while calculating in his mind. Not only that, but Beelzebub also absorbed the ox bear and healed himself. Suddenly, someone approached him holding a bowl of food. "Hey, slave." He looked over in surprise. It was Ingen. She cleared her throat awkwardly and asked, "Aren't you still hungry? I stole this from the priest and brought it for you. Hunters have the right to eat more." Viker hesitated and replied, "I already got a portion of meat, a bowl of blood, and a portion of intestines." Ayan stood up angrily, handed him the bowl of food, and said, "That's true, but you have to eat this too." She shouted loudly about its benefits, saying eating eyes is good for eyesight, eating hearts strengthens the heart, and eating feet is good for the feet. Holding a bowl of food in his hand, he looked at it and guessed, "Is this long thing intestines? Do you think my intestines are weak?" Suddenly, 3 other girls appeared. They made funny faces and shouted, "Boo! Chai Wai, you're being so biased. Why are you giving that part to a slave? It's so obvious to see your motive." Ayan, feeling embarrassed, yelled, "Shut up." Viker chewed while thinking tough. As he swallowed his food, Ayan showed a joyful expression. She smiled brightly and said, "Now you can fulfill your duty." His cheeks were stuffed with food, making them round. He chewed and thought, "I've already completed the hunting mission. What more does she want?" The next day, when the sunlight had softened, a person was busy standing among the small stones. It turned out to be Viker. He was standing in front of a gigantic tree. There was a deep, smoky hollow in the trunk. He gazed at it, silently thinking what she said yesterday is true. He recalled the scene from the day before, a pile of meat stacked on the tree trunk. He asked, "Why did you leave all this good meat here?" The two of them stood in front of the tree that had been cut off, now covered in meat. Ayan replied, "Didn't I tell you that our village is short on food? So we are going to make a sacrifice here." She looked up thoughtfully and said, "For Madame Eight Legs to ask for her permission to let us live in this jungle." He remembered the horrifying scene and thought to himself, "Madame Eight Legs, if you encounter this in the jungle, there would be no way to survive." Looking at the villagers of Black and their attitude towards it made him realize how reckless he had been. The sun was rising higher, casting light into the forest. Viker grimaced and said, "What a bothersome creature." After returning to the tribe, he stood there, staring at the poles tied with ropes. In front of him was a long line of girls doing something. He asked in surprise, "What's going on?" He silently speculated, "Is there another ceremony?" The girls were chatting and getting to know each other. "I've been standing here since dawn. At least my turn is coming soon. I haven't slept all night. One cheerful girl said, based on the results of yesterday's ceremony, I bet we could become normal people, right? The girl next to her guessed that maybe one of the girls in the village would become his wife. If he managed to hunt an ox bear, he must be really strong. Suddenly, someone approached them and scolded, "You bunch of idiots." The girl who had just been speaking fell silent in surprise. It turned out to be Ayan. She carried a deer on Viker as she came over to warn them, saying, "I was the one who gave him the bowl of soup yesterday. How dare you take what belongs to me?" She dropped the deer on the ground and frowned at them. The group of girls seemed unfazed and continued, "Well, then you should use it first and share it with us, right? You're being too greedy, leader." Ayan frowned in disgust and said, "You're not satisfied. Go set your own traps and catch one yourself." They wailed in complaint, "We've been out hunting so much already." The girls didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of the issue and piped up again, "We've even been to the borders of the empire, and there's nobody like him there." Ayan glared at them in anger, grinding her teeth as she replied, "Really? Then maybe there's someone in hell." The group of girls immediately panicked and ran away. Ayan placed her hand on her forehead, worried as she said, "By the time he recovers, these guys will probably steal him away. Since I made him eat that thing from the ox bear, I have to order him to fulfill his manly duty." The protagonist they had been talking about had been standing behind the barrier, watching the whole time. As if realizing something, Ayan suddenly turned around. She saw the furious expression on his face, darkening by the second, and stammered, "Huh? You weren't everything?" "Ah, well, yeah." Viker felt like he had turned to stone. He silently reflected on what he had eaten the previous day. Ayan hurried in front of him, forcing a smile as she said, "Last night, I heard my mother summon the elders for a meeting. You can ask her for something. It's part of the honor of being a hunter." Suddenly, her face flushed and she hesitated before saying, "When your mother calls for you, I thought of something you should ask for." Viker's eyes widened as he leaned in to hear what she had to say. "You should ask for." The next morning in the main tent, the elders and others had gathered. They looked at Viker, who was wearing tribal clothes, kneeling as he performed the ritual. He looked at Aquila and said, "Greetings, chief." She crossed her legs and casually asked, "You caught the ox bear, didn't you?" "Thanks to you. I had a delicious meal." He placed his hands behind his back and replied, "I just did what I had to do." The chief looked at him and said with a smile, "No need to be modest. You did really well." She continued, "It seems your wound is healing pretty well. Your recovery speed is impressive." He was surprised and answered, "Thank you for your concern." Inside, he thought, "This is interesting. Night Fox Aquila, a legendary archer feared by the Empire, only leads the black tribe of fewer than 300 people." She looked at him and asked with a smile, "Did you also save Ayan?" Viker quietly admired. She has the same commanding presence as Hugo, yet she is also warm and gentle. He raised his head to look at Aquila, who then said, "I should reward you. To honor your accomplishments yesterday, I will change your status. You will no longer be a slave. You will become part of the family." A human, hearing this, rested his chin on his hand and cleared his throat. He stared at the old man, recalling how the elders were unhappy with the change in his status. The old man had applied face paint on the hunters and shamans of the black tribe. He remembered the arrogant face of that man and thought to himself, "So he's Mr. A Human, huh?" Noticing him staring, the old man gritted his teeth and asked, "What are you looking at?" Pushing himself up, the old man said, "Now that you're a member of the black tribe, tell me what you want." An older woman approached him, extending her hand with a smile. "Even though I didn't give birth to you or raise you, now that you're one of us, I will accept your request." She continued, "If you want a beautiful girl from the village, I will bless the two of you. If you don't want a partner, you can also choose a slave." On this side, people were dancing and signaling. "You haven't forgotten what I said, have you?" He glanced over, then closed his eyes, calmly stating, "I have a request." Aquila laughed and replied, "Go ahead. I've noticed two individuals you've been eyeing." Seeing her daughter's reaction, the woman was surprised and thought, "That little Ayan is waving and dancing so much. Does she want him that badly?" Ayan looked at Viker and slowly said, "If you agree." He placed his hand on his chest and seriously declared, "Then I want to bathe in the pool of heroes." A human gasped in shock. "What?" The other elders, along with Ahan, stared wide-eyed, astonished by his request. Ayan smiled with satisfaction. Aquila's expression changed instantly. She was furious and gritted her teeth, asking, "Do you even know what you're asking for when you mention the pool of heroes?" The atmosphere in the tent grew extremely tense. The elders stared at him, shocked that he was boldly confronting the chief. A human, angry, shouted, "You fool! Do you even know who you're standing in front of to be so arrogant?" He stood up, glaring as he said, "Chief, only high-ranking black warriors are allowed to bathe in the pool of heroes. Please don't listen to this worthless guy. I'll even seize the opportunity to agree. That's right. Only true heroes who have proven their strength can enter the pool of heroes. How dare this guy even ask for such a thing?" Ayan, dissatisfied, shot a glare at him and explained, Viker has already proven his strength. He was the one who captured the ox bear, wasn't he? The village chief squinted and asked him, do you even know what the hero's spring is? Viker responded seriously, I know. He went on to paint a picture with his words, describing the clear, jewel-toned blue water. The hero's spring was a sacred shrine, accessible only to the strongest warriors of the Black Tribe. The spring was surrounded by sharp stones, and just dipping into that hot water would heal all wounds, both internal and external. As Viker finished his explanation, he couldn't help but think about it. But Ayan pointed out that filling that spring took a long time, and only warriors who had made significant contributions were allowed to use it. Aquila looked at him in astonishment. The elders listened to his fluent description and couldn't help but soften. One of them replied, we can't just let an outsider, who has only recently become a commoner, go to the shrine. Another countered, but this child shows great potential. Letting him visit once could be encouraging. The group began to debate the issue. Some argued, do you think the hero's spring is a public swimming pool that anyone can enter? Others recalled the impressive feats of the boy and quickly remarked, he's injured, and now that we see him as family, we should treat him well. Aquila looked at them, contemplating, I want to agree, but it really doesn't seem reasonable. The shaman and the guards strongly opposed the idea. Suddenly, a bell rang out, and Aquila's eyes widened in surprise. Outside the tent, the wind was rising, signaling that a battle was about to begin. Inside the tent, Viker asked, is the bell signaling a fight is coming? Ayan moved closer to him, stretching his limbs, and replied, it's just visitors. No fool would dare to challenge the Black Tribe right here in the woods. The tribe leader turned around, ready to leave, and said, let's discuss this later. Everyone returned to their positions. A human glanced disapprovingly at her, his eyes gleaming with resentment. Ayan and Viker stepped outside the tent. In front of them, a large crowd had gathered, forming a circle to watch. Viker asked, is that the visitors? Ayan cheerfully replied, yep. In the front, numerous horse-drawn wagons appeared, carrying goods on board. Soldiers took turns unloading wooden crates onto the ground. Ayan looked at him and explained, those merchants bring things that aren't found in the forest. We all look forward to the day they arrive here. Viker furrowed his brow and observed closely. He pondered the symbol in his mind. One of the 7 trading clans, the Borjuis family, represented by a symbol with 2 scales and intertwined patterns. He frowned thoughtfully and wondered, to get here from the capital of the empire, it must pass through the lands of the Baskerville or Morg families. How do they manage to come here? Those 2 clans wouldn't let them through. Could it be? He glanced at the strange man who smiled and whispered his guess, are they smuggling? The man stepped forward, spreading his arms in greeting. Hello everyone, the 5-day market is here, he said excitedly. If you want to exchange anything, bring it up here. Immediately, 2 young men approached with items to trade. They smiled at him and said, hello, we've been looking forward to this day. The market was bustling with activity. Tribe members rushed in to exchange goods. One young man kept advertising, this is a crystal ball that helps you have sweet dreams when placed by the bed. No one wanted to back down. Another person chimed in, we even have cosmetics over here, and we have rice too. Viker cautiously observed them. He thought to himself, these merchants have brought food and essential goods commonly found throughout the empire. A tribal man, carrying a bow on his back, approached with items to trade. Here is the hide of a magical beast. The merchant happily responded, I will trade you a bag of rice for that. Viker found it hard to believe. They are willing to trade such rare items from the jungle for these ordinary things. The tribal man then presented the hide. Viker firmly thought, these merchants can't be unaware of the value of these things. Are they taking advantage of the Black Tribe? Well, they will have to figure this out for themselves. If I get involved and they recognize me, it could lead to trouble. He turned to leave. Suddenly, Ayan, holding an ear of corn, frowned and shouted, wait, this doesn't make any sense. She angrily looked at the merchant and yelled, trading a diamond for an ear of corn? What's that about? The merchant looked frightened and quickly waved his hands to calm her down. Viker turned to look at her and felt pleased. Thank goodness there's at least one rational person around. Ayan made an annoyed face and gritted her teeth. I should at least get 2 ears of corn for that. As expected, the girl held 2 corn cobs in her hands, sticking out her tongue and posing for Viker. He sighed in frustration and turned away, thinking to himself, this girl is just like everyone else, jumping on a trend. Everyone was upset about the disparity between what they gave and what they received. One person shouted in anger, how can a pearl be worth the same as a cabbage? A balding guy complained, at least it should be 2 cabbages. The guy with the lion's mane was surprised and asked, only 1 cabbage? They all replied angrily, we're not giving you the other antler. 1 is enough. The old man at the head of the trading clan glared at them in anger, his teeth grinding together at the scene. The vendor helplessly said, I can't compete with the Black Warriors. I'll give you more. The three people from before, holding their spoils, kept posing and celebrating their victory. The smuggler, Tuongnan, looked at them and silently cursed. These foolish blacks don't even realize the true value of what they're trading. Suddenly, a little girl approached him and raised her hand, saying, "Mister, can I have a glass or two?" He replied, "I have plenty. What do you want to trade?" The girl cheerfully held up the item she wanted to trade, a rare, delicious, and very nutritious beetle larvae. The old man raised an eyebrow in disdain. Bleh. Then he swatted the larvae out of the girl's hand. Angrily, he asked, "Why would I eat something like that?" The girl looked at him in surprise. She sadly sat down on the ground, mourning the lost larvae. The old man, feeling irritated, turned to leave, muttering, "That barbarian girl isn't half bad-looking." Observing the child crying softly, he had a wicked thought. I could probably sell her into slavery for a good price. Just then, someone touched the girl's hairpin. A voice called out, "Hey, merchant." The old man widened his eyes in shock. It was Viker. He knelt beside the girl, looking sternly at the old man, and said, "This deal doesn't make sense." Ayan turned around in surprise and thought, "Viker, what is he saying?" He immediately pretended to smile and flatter, saying, "Oh, you know the Imperial language. It's just a misunderstanding." The man responded, "It's about your plan to sell that black child into slavery. That doesn't matter now. You need to cancel all the unfair transactions today." The old man, annoyed, raised his hand and asked, "Unfair? What do you mean unfair?" Ayan stood up, facing him directly, and said, "You're selling these items at prices completely out of line with the market." Viker leaned in close to his face. He secretly thought, it seems he's the only one who knows the Imperial language. Then he hesitantly explained, "You're talking as if you know the market value. This is a sacred transaction approved by Puppy Black, the representative of the forest god." He looked down on Ayan and said, "A worthless, poor guy like you shouldn't interfere." Suddenly, Ayan raised his hand and pointed at some barrels filled with corn, saying, "The corn you brought costs 100 gold coins each, but the diamond you receive is worth about 2 million gold coins." He looked at him in shock. Viker grinned triumphantly and continued, "If you grind the horns of an ox bear into a sphere, it can sell for 1 million, just like the goblin butt mushroom, which is a new medicine." The cunning merchant stared wide-eyed in fear. Worry coursed through him as he thought, how does he know the market price so accurately? Holding a bright green sphere in his hand, he said, "And this glass sphere for sweet dreams. If you keep this by your side, you'll be drugged and only dream beautiful things. There are small holes in the sphere to release the drug. The substance inside is cheap but harmful to the body if used in excess, and I know for sure it's banned in the Empire." He calmly pointed out to the merchant, "You seem to be selling it for a much higher price." With a firm grip, he crushed the sphere, and under the merchant's astonished gaze, it shattered into pieces from his strength. Another man inquired in Imperial language, "What's going on?" The merchant gritted his teeth and replied, "Someone has discovered it." Ayan, hearing a few words in a daze, realized the seriousness of the exchange. She approached him, furrowing her brow, and asked, "Did you just say the drug is harmful to the body?" He replied, "Yeah." Ayan suddenly remembered something. Her expression changed, and she angrily gritted her teeth, saying, "Don't tell me the reason so many people here have suddenly fallen ill is because of." Seeing that the situation was not looking good, the man thought to himself, "I should get out of here." The cunning old merchant clasped his hands together and forced a smile, saying, "It seems there's been a misunderstanding." Suddenly, a green arrow shot into his shoulder. He gritted his teeth and glared at it. The arrow had been fired by Ayan. She scowled in anger at the old man. In pain, he was helped down to the ground by his subordinates, clutching the spot where he'd been hit, cursing, "You filthy scum." Ayan shouted angrily, "How dare you lie to our black tribe?" The people in the tribe, who were holding the items they had just traded, were left in shock and worried. "Lie? There's no way these items." The merchant spat, "Damn it," then ordered his men to quickly mount their horses and leave, saying, "Grab your belongings and run." Viker, confused, turned to Ayan and asked, "Why are you letting them go? Merchants never return home without a profit." Ayan replied, "I would never let them go. Injuring and releasing animals when hunting is a tactic to ensure they linger and reveal their location later." The old cunning merchant sat behind his subordinates, clutching his wound where the arrow had pierced him, and cursed, "Those damn blacks." Ayan skillfully responded, "They tend to return to their den when injured." After a long chase, they finally reached their gathering point. They slowed their horses and approached the cooking area. He was still furious, cursing, "Damn it, those blacks took everything from me." Everyone dismounted to rest, each carrying weapons and expressions filled with hatred. He ordered, "Get ready for a fight." That night, from a high vantage point, one could easily see the most distinctive sight, the resting place of the bourgeois. They had set a fire, creating a thick plume of smoke. 2 birds flew toward that direction to scout. After gathering enough information, the white bird landed on its owner's hand. Viker glanced at Ayan, who was fuming, and said, "They dared to provoke the Black Tribe. They will face only one outcome." Her eyes sparkled fiercely, and the presence of the bird on her hand only intensified the deadly aura surrounding her. Coldly, she declared, "They will be annihilated." In the darkness, a group of mercenaries was slowly moving forward. The one-eyed mercenary turned to the smuggler from the Bourgeois family and said, "You seem quite surprised that those blacks stole your goods. Didn't I tell you? You can't trust those savages. You should eliminate them and turn the rest into slaves." The smuggler, sweating, replied, "Since this is your first time in the jungle, you might not know, but defeating those blacks isn't easy." The mercenary reached in his pocket and disdainfully pulled out a matchbox. "If you're scared, then why did you bring us along? Isn't it your goal for us to take care of them if the deal goes south?" He struck a match to light it. "Just remember, our protection fees are part of your overall profit." Lighting a cigarette, he held the matchbox in front of the smuggler, offering him one while handing a match to another mercenary. With a greedy look, he added, "So it's only fair that we take everything from this heist." The smuggler from the Bourgeois family silently regarded the mercenary before closing his eyes again and said, "Do whatever you want." The mercenary laughed and said, "Are they really that tough? We just need to ambush them at night and burn them to the ground." While the mercenary was talking to the smuggler, two other mercenaries nearby were arguing about a matchstick. "Don't put it out yet. Let me light my cigarette first." The mercenary with a scar on his cheek replied, "A match can only light the cigarettes of two people. Haven't you ever heard of the battlefield rules?" The mercenary with a scar on his nose stubbornly insisted on lighting his cigarette. "I'm not superstitious like that." A darting arrow pierced the head of the mercenary with the nose scar. Next, another arrow shot through the brain of the mercenary with the scar on his cheek. An arrow was on its way toward the mercenary, who was still chatting with the smuggler, saying, "I used to capture forest people and sell them as slaves." The smuggler, Bourgeois, watched in shock as blood splattered across his face. A flurry of arrows flew through the air, sending the mercenaries into a panic. The smuggler yelled in alarm, "It's the Black Tribe! Put out that cigarette!" Ayan and many black warriors raised their bows, getting ready to shoot. She fiercely declared, "I won't allow any of you to hit anything other than their heads. Show them the terror of the black." Viker looked at the black warriors and thought every black warrior can shoot an arrow to any spot they want. Just looking at the glow of smoke from the opponent's cigarette is enough. A tall, muscular guy by the wooden barricade said to Viker, "Hey, slave, what you asked for is being prepared." Viker glanced at him and replied, "I've been set free, so I'm not a slave anymore." He laughed loudly and said, "Ha ha, don't be so petty." The arrows from the black warriors struck the mercenaries' shields, creating cracks and breaks. The captain shouted, "Mages in formation, use your shields to block their arrows." Mages get ready to counterattack. Arrows tied with ropes flew towards them. 2 arrows carried wooden barrels attached to their shafts. Then 4 or 5 more barrels were shot over. The captain looked up in astonishment. "They're firing barrels at us." Wait a moment. Thick black liquid oozed from the small cracks in the barrels. Flaming arrows shot toward wooden barrels filled with thick black liquid. When they collided, a massive explosion erupted. The mercenaries caught in the fire groaned in pain, shouting, "Fire! They're setting us ablaze!" And the smuggler from the Bourgeois family is hiding behind a tree. He surveyed the scene, grinding his teeth and thinking, "Did they shoot the oil barrels with arrows tied to ropes? When did these guys get so smart?" From the shadows, someone approached him slowly. The man stopped, and the smuggler jerked around in surprise, saying, You filthy bastard, you ruined my plan." Viker stepped forward with a fierce glare. Fearful, the smuggler stammered, "If you kill me, you'll regret it." The smuggler produced a document. Though scared, he tried to sound brave, saying, "This is an exploration permit I received from the city of Underdog. It has the seal of the new consul. If you kill me, the Baskerville family will hunt you down." Viker's voice grew ominous as he asked, "Is the consul you mentioned Butcher?" He replied loudly, "Yes, it's Butcher. That's right." Viker, filled with menace, stated, "That's strange. I don't recall giving any permission for this." The merchant, looking weary and frightened, said, "Huh? Your skin color is different from before." "That can't be." He started to say, "Aye," but before he could finish his sentence, an arrow shot straight into his brain. Viker stated, "The punishment for forging the Baskerville seal is death." Ayan, the white wolf, rushed over and said, "Slave, we have to run." Viker glanced at her and replied, "I am not a slave." Everything fell silent. The mercenary behind them, surprised, asked, "Why can't I hear the arrow anymore?" The crowd began to chatter. "Those black are running away. The fact they use fire means they lack confidence in their fighting skills. Let's chase after them." Suddenly, something terrifying rose into the air behind the mercenary. He excitedly declared, "Those damn barbarians, I'll kill every last one of you." Long legs, numerous like a spider, stabbed straight down into the ground. Viker looked at the mercenaries groaning in fear and said, "It's a monster." Ayan turned back, laughing, and said to Viker, "You actually thought the lady would show up and attack with fire? You truly become a black now." Viker replied, "Every time I see her, it feels like that." Viker looked at the rebellious lady with quiet fear. It truly was a disaster. When they returned to the home of Black, Aquila said to Viker, "I will allow you to enter the Spring of Heroes." Aquila listed the solutions for the food shortage after catching the ox bear and winning the last battle without any casualties by using oil barrels. She discovered that the sickness affecting the Black warriors was due to counterfeit medicine. Aquila praised Viker in front of the tribe's elders, saying, "You truly are a brave warrior." Aquila then addressed Ayan, saying, "And tonight is the full moon, so Ayan, take Viker to the Spring of Heroes." Ayan stood up and replied, "Yes, mother." Ayan wrapped an arm around Viker and joked, "Serves you right." Viker looked at Ayan with curiosity. Ayan glanced over at a human who was trembling with anger and said to Viker, "Just look at a human's furious face. He claims that the warriors are sick because they are cursed, but thanks to you, his words carry no weight now." Viker recalled the words of the smuggler from the Bourgeois family. "This is a matter sanctified by the sacred disease permitted by teacher Puppet Black, the messenger of the forest god." He remarked flatly, "A curse, huh?" Later that night, when the moon was high in the sky, Viker was soaking in a stream. Feeling heroic, he let out a relaxed breath. There were rabbits and ducks swimming in the water in front of him. As he watched the water flow through his hands, he thought his mana was becoming purer. He could sense his broken bones healing, saying to himself, "That old man won't stir up trouble again. With his self-righteousness, he'll come here on his own." Though not as effective as the river Styx back in Baskerville, the lack of age limits here seemed much better. Veer said darkly, "And wouldn't it be less effective if she joined in too? I'm sure the chief would advise me to go in alone." Ayan, who was also soaking in the stream and idly twirling her bangs, replied, "Does it really matter? The true Black won't be so petty about it." Ayan looked at Viker and said, "It's all thanks to Lord Adonis for discovering this hot spring." Viker asked, "Adonis?" Ayan recalled the image of the legendary warrior of the Black tribe. He was a strong man with a sturdy bow. He was the only one who could fight with the lady reigning deep in the forest, the best warrior in the tribe. Ayan said to Viker, "Now that you are a Black, remember to respect him." Viker replied calmly, "If he truly fought that monster, then he is indeed worthy of respect." Ayan responded fiercely, "He really is." Crossing her arms and turning away, Ayan said, "Oh man, talking to outsiders is really difficult." Suddenly, Ayan blushed as she remembered her mother's words. Now he is just a commoner and has a good reputation in the village. When he recovers thanks to the hero's spring and returns to normal, he will surely make a decent husband. Ayan blushed again, glancing at Viker, who was combing his hair and looking quite handsome. She thought to herself, "Today, I will make Viker mine." Viker and Ayan were still soaking in the pond. Ayan smiled at Viker and said, "Actually, I know those merchants are making a huge profit. I suspected them for a while, so taking this opportunity to get back at them sounds good." Ayan said, "If you don't do it, then I will." Viker closed his eyes and replied, "I understand." Ayan blushed and looked away. "Don't smile like that. I really know. Diamonds are more expensive than corn in the Empire." Viker smirked and asked, "How expensive?" Ayan hesitated and replied, "About 2 years of corn." Ayan anxiously guessed 30. Viker answered, "Wrong. The amount of corn you could buy with 1 diamond is." Viker finished saying the number of corn that could be bought. Ayan gasped in astonishment and exclaimed, "What? You can buy that much?" Realizing she might have overreacted, Ayan stood up, covering her mouth with her hand, and said, "Oh, slave, of course I knew that. You Empire folks are just so foolish. What good is that stone anyway?" Viker replied, "It doesn't matter." Viker continued, "Do you want to call me by my name, or do you want to call me slave? What do you want to call me now? I don't like things that aren't clear." Ayan suddenly asked, "Do I really want to call you anything?" Ayan bit her lip. Ayan walked up to Viker and asked, "You don't like unclear things, do you?" Ayan took hold of Viker's chin and said, "Then I'll be clear." Viker raised an eyebrow at Ayan's actions, curious. Ayan blushed and said, "I don't want to call you a slave or Viker." Ayan leaned closer to Viker's lips and whispered, "I want to call you." But then, a group of children suddenly jumped into the hero's spring. Their laughter and splashing water interrupted Ayan's moment. The kids giggled as they ran over to Ayan, saying, "Wow, big sister, look, it's Brother Viker." Ayan looked surprised and asked, "How did you all get in here?" The kids were excited, splashing around as they said, "Big sister, come play with us." Viker watched Ayan and thought, if she doesn't want to call me by name or a slave, what does she want to call me? Frustrated, Ayan splashed the water and complained, "You little brats, if you're here, it's going to ruin everything." Two of the kids got scared and hid behind Viker. He spoke up for them, saying, "Didn't you say you wouldn't really mind if they played here?" Hearing that, the kids chimed in, "Right, you're being too stingy." Anne could only glare at them while gritting her teeth. Allen held two girls and said, "It's the chief's order. Because of the side effects for the medicine the traders brought, he said the sick children should bathe in the heroic spring." Anne imagined Aquila smirking at her and grinding her teeth, thinking, "Mom, don't tell me you want to embarrass us." Ahavan looked at Viker nervously and cleared his throat. Viker looked at Ahan, puzzled. Ahan awkwardly scratched his neck, glanced away, and said, "Thank you for helping my sister." Hirobi even said, "Thank you, big brother." Ahan added, and I'm sorry for misunderstanding you all this time." Viker looked at Ahan and simply replied, "Yeah." Ahavan fell silent, clenching his fists. Frustrated, Ahan shouted, "I already apologized. Why are you acting like that?" Viker, with an empty stare, said, "Ahan, you're being too hot-headed." Ayan witnessed everything and, forgetting her anger, sighed, thinking, "Oh boy, oh well, there's still plenty of time." Ayan called out to Viker. She put her hands on her hips, grinning wide, and said, "Congratulations, you officially become a real black." Some time passed. In the blink of an eye, 2 years went by, and Ahanan was struck in the face, leaving him disfigured. He fell to the ground, letting out a cry. Puke. The Black Warriors and Ayan were taken aback. Viker raised his fist and said, "You're weaker than I thought, Ahan." Now, Viker van Baskerville was 17 years old. Ahan covered his mouth and pleaded, "One more time." But Viker turned away and replied, "That's it for today." Ahan looked at Viker and yelled, "Are you running away?" Yet Viker dismissed him and kept walking, saying, "I'm just taking a stroll." Two Black Warriors helped Ahan to his feet. With a helpless expression, he said, "Annoying guy. Once he's fully healed, he'll be even stronger." A long-haired warrior nodded in agreement, saying, "I've heard his archery skills are already on par with the commander." But a brown-haired warrior objected, "But how can you compare him to the commander?" The brown-haired warrior said, "I can make Ahan's nose bleed too." Ahan, wiping his nose of blood, replied, "I wasn't hit." He responded, "Ha." Ahan explained, "His punch didn't even touch me. It just stopped right in front of my face." The blonde warrior was shocked and said, "So you're telling me he made you bleed just from the pressure of his punch?" Meanwhile, Viker was soaked in sweat, panting heavily. Viker looked up and said, "I can do it perfectly now." He glanced at the large round dents on the rocky slope and happily remarked, "I can handle the sixth technique." From his right hand, Beelzebub materialized as his sword. Viker looked down and said, "Even though I still have a long way to go to reach the 10th technique, achieving the 6th technique at just 17 years old is impressive." Viker thought to himself, "I also have 6 mana circles. With this, I can be a high-rank graduate." He sheathed Beelzebub and reflected, with a blessing from the river Styx, the demonic sword Beelzebub, and the combat skills I learned from the Black Tribe, I can take on a high-rank graduate now. Hearing the soft whisper of the wind, Viker reminisced, "I've been in the jungle for 2 years now. I guess I'll say goodbye to the Black Tribe once I'm ready." But Kiro was playfully chasing a colorful butterfly. Viker knelt down to touch the ground and said, "There are tracks from Mushushu, a large jungle snake." Ian, holding her bow and arrow, stood behind Viker, deep in thought. "Oh, really?" Viker replied, "If we catch it, the village will have enough food for 4 days." Ian exclaimed, "Is that so?" Viker remained silent, studying Ian, and asked, "What are you thinking about while hunting, Ian?" Viker hit a nerve, and Ian blushed and yelled, "I'm not thinking of anything." She turned to the side, rummaging through a pouch next to Bakira, saying, "All right, the other hunting group told me to ask you about this." Viker eyed Ian suspiciously, thinking she's hiding something. Ian pulled out a dagger engraved with a symbol from her pouch. She asked Viker, "The group bought this dagger from an imperial intruder in the jungle. Do you recognize this symbol?" Viker looked at the symbol on the dagger and replied, "Oh, it's really famous. It belongs to a very well-known family, the Leviathan, an important clan among the 7 great families of the Empire, along with the Baskerville and the Iron-Blooded Sword Clan." Ayan seriously recounted, "We thought it was the dagger belonging to the mercenaries we killed 2 years ago, but thankfully, it's not. There's one thing that continues to bother me, though. They poured a red liquid in several places upstream before retreating. That hunting group also caught someone, but he bit down on a poison capsule and died. The only thing left is that dagger." Ayan said something that made Viker look up and pay attention. "And I want to ask you this. Don't you want to go home?" Viker put his hand behind his neck and replied, "What made you ask that out of the blue, and with that expression too?" Ayan couldn't bring herself to look directly into Viker's eyes. Feeling anxious, she said, "I don't like secrets or lies, so please just tell me." She continued, "Actually, There's another person from the Empire who's entered the forest. Viker was surprised when he heard Ayan say, I think she's targeting you. Ayan's gaze fell heavily as she looked at Viker. She recalled the image of the red-haired girl walking confidently. She said, she's entered the jungle. Ayan wrapped her arms around herself, looking down at the ground with a hint of sadness. Actually, 2 years ago, when you fought the lady, she went into the jungle with a rescue team to investigate. I think she was trying to find traces of you. Ayan turned her eyes away and asked, are you going to go with her? She felt anxious, her mind racing with questions. Does he hate me for hiding this? If he says he's going with her, what should I do? Should I use the tribe's laws to stop him? Would that even work? Viker spoke up calmly, saying, I won't be going back. Ayan seemed unable to believe what she had just heard. She asked again, really? Vi replied, yeah. Ayan felt a weight lift off her heart, clearly brightening up. She was as joyful as a child receiving candy, throwing her arms around Buria and saying, Viker isn't leaving. Meanwhile, Viker was deep in thought, wondering, I thought the Empire knew I was still alive, but it seems that that's not the case. Viker contemplated, I can go back once I've completely hidden my powers from Hugo without being discovered. Is the person Ayan mentioned Camus Morgue? Has she not forgotten that I saved her? Or is this trip some sort of diplomatic event? If the Baskerville family allowed the Morgue rescue team into the forest, it means their alliance is very strong. Did the two families unite because of my death? I need to investigate what's happening outside the forest. Just then, from the lake beside where they stood, a large fish leaped out, breaking Viker's train of thought. Ayan and Viker both stared wide-eyed as the big fish jumped out of the water and fell onto the shore. From its mouth, a thick, cloudy white substance flowed out. Viker asked, a lungfish? Ayan looked at the fish and said, it jumped out of the river, so it must be almost rainy season. Given its size, this year's rainy season is probably going to be long. Viker noticed something. Wait a minute. Ayan replied, what's up? Viker saw a sprout growing from the fish's body. He and Ayan approached it. Viker took his sword and cut into the spot where the sprout was growing. Inside was a white skeleton with just a few scraps of fabric and a necklace with large beads around the neck. This spear belongs to him, Viker said. He was lying on his back and the spear had pierced through the fish's flesh. Ayan examined the bones and said, judging by the clothes, he looks like a dreg for Rococo. He must have been speared by it, and there are signs of a struggle too. He must have been completely caught off guard when he was eaten. Ayan turned to look at Viker. Lungfish are pretty dumb fish that eat dead things. This is really strange. Viker jumped down from the fish and replied, he must have been so weak that the fish thought he was dead. Viker asked mysteriously, Ayan, how could someone so weak go hunting? What if the state of the tribe is that bad? Something must be going on in the forest. We might need to investigate. As twilight gradually descended upon the forest, Viker walked slowly, taking his time. Ayan covered his nose and exclaimed, ugh. Looking at the bodies sprawled before them, Ayan inquired, these bodies look like they've been dead for quite some time. Ayan confirmed again, so the Rococo warriors are all dead, huh? Viker touched one of the bodies, contemplating the signs of vomiting and diarrhea along with the red rashes. Don't tell me. Ayan interrupted his thoughts, shouting, Viker, look over there. Ayan pointed out, it's way past mealtime, but there are signs of a fire leading to the Rococo village. As night fell, skulls and skeletons hung from ropes dangling in the trees. The houses and fences lay in ruin. The entire village was devoid of any sign of life. That was what Viker and Ayan saw as they stepped into the home of the Rococo tribe. Viker looked around and said, it's strange. There isn't a trace of life anywhere. Viker looked down at the ground and remarked, it's been a while since anyone has cleaned up around here. You can tell just by looking at this grass. Ayan lifted a curtain and asked in confusion, so where did the Roco people move to? A swarm of insects flew out from inside the tent, surprising Ayan. She was shocked to find a corpse inside. Covering her nose, she screamed, Viker, there's a dead body here. Viker replied, there's one over here too. As Viker stood up and examined the bodies, he quickly noticed something common among them and the red rashes on their skin. I just remember in my past life there was an epidemic in the jungle around this time. It was called the Red Death, a highly contagious disease that nearly wiped out the entire tribe and its creatures. Their bodies were covered in red rashes and they experienced vomiting and diarrhea. Then they fell into a coma, suffering in pain until they died slowly. This disease spread so fast that it crossed the borders of the empire. Ayan urged, we need to leave here quickly. This is a curse of the god. Viker calmly responded, don't worry, it's just an infectious disease. Ayan replied, huh? That makes it even more serious. Viker reassured, calm down, it's not that bad. Ayan asked, are you sure it's not a curse? Viker helplessly replied, if you're scared, you can head back. Han worriedly questioned, "What if you die from the curse?" Viker gently answered, "Then I'll just die." Aen exclaimed, "Who said you can die?" Viker looked away, thinking, "I did." He began to walk away, but turned back to Aen, saying, "Counting the bodies, it seems they haven't all been wiped out. Maybe they moved somewhere else and left behind the sick and dead. I'm going to their camp to grab a few things. You should find somewhere to rest." Aen crossed her arms in frustration, stubbornly sticking to her thoughts. They used soul-summoning magic. That's why this happened. She watched as Viker walked away, thinking, this guy really has no sensitivity at all. Suddenly, Aen felt a chill run down her spine. She slowly turned around. Viker heard Aen scream. He rubbed the back of his neck and approached her, asking, "What's going on?" Aen, terrified, fell to the ground and stammered, "It's the curse." Aen pointed straight ahead with determination, shouting, "It's a cursed child." Viker noticed a girl with messy, long hair covering her face, wearing a torn dress. The sound of Aen's screams echoed around them. "We have to run, Viker. You go ahead. I'll follow right after." Aen clutched her ankle, groaning in pain. "Ugh, my leg is cramping." Viker moved past Aen and knelt before the girl, causing her to gasp in surprise. He looked at her and thought that she didn't appear to be from the Rococo tribe. "She looks about 5 years old," he mused. Viker glanced at a mound of dirt piled up nearby, with a flower sprouting beneath it. He realized it must be a grave for someone. He asked the girl, "Who are you?" She responded with broken phrases, "Rococo, slave, kitchen helper." Viker replied, "So you are a slave of the Rococo tribe." He continued, "What is your name?" The girl answered, "Pomerian." Viker thought about the girl's name, an imperial name. Could she be a child kidnapped by the Rococo? Suddenly, the girl spoke again, "La Baskerville." Viker felt like he had just woken up from a nightmare upon hearing that. He couldn't believe it and asked her again, "What did you just say?" The girl pointed at herself and said, "Pomerian." Then she lifted her face to reveal her characteristic red eyes. La Baskerville. The Baskerville family had 3 types of middle names. Offspring from the paternal line were given the name Van, while males from the direct line were named Lee. And although it was rarely used because the Baskerville family mostly had males, there was also a special middle name for direct line females, La. The girl looked up, her red eyes shining. Pomerian La Baskerville. Viker was surprised, thinking, "What? I'm pretty sure there are very few people in the family with this middle name." Aen pointed and said, "Viker, look." Aen was pointing at the pendant on Pomerian's neck. "Isn't that your family's emblem?" Pomerian jumped when Viker suddenly grabbed the pendant. He said, "Can I borrow this for a moment?" Viker was astonished. He opened the locket, amazed, thinking it couldn't be. Inside the locket was a picture of a family of 3. Viker was shocked to recognize the man, Hugo Le Baskerville. Viker grabbed the locket forcefully, wondering how that old man could be in the photo. Pomerian desperately held onto the locket, ignoring how her body was shaking. Viker spoke with an edge in his voice. "Who are the people in this picture? What's their connection to you?" Pomerian fearfully took a step back. Aen, feeling helpless, said, "You can't just interrogate a kid like that. Be a little gentle." Viker bit his lip, realizing he was letting his surprise get the better of him. "This child is innocent." He asked softly, "Can you tell me who the people in the picture are, sweetie?" Viker tried to put on a friendly smile, which came off as sincere despite his turmoil inside. Aen leaned down and whispered to Viker, "Well, you know how to put on that kind of smile too, don't you?" Viker fell silent, unsure of how to respond. Pomerian opened her mouth, pointing at the locket. "Ma, Grandma, Grandpa." Viker broke out in a sweat, thinking, "Grandpa." So what the Butlerberry said might actually be true. As they walked, Viker curiously asked, "What do you mean?" The kind-hearted Butlerberry replied, "You might not believe it, but the patriarch used to be a very gentle and caring person." Viker seemed to be skeptical. "The patriarch? Not many people in the Baskerville family would believe what you're saying." With a worn expression, Butlerberry continued, "In fact, the patriarch deeply loved his first wife, Lady Rosanna, and cared for her immensely. However, her passing due to illness wasn't the reason for the patriarch's change. It all began when their only child, Miss Penelope, was kidnapped by the barbarians. The turning point started there. The patriarch hurriedly sent people to search for Miss Penelope. Because of this, he sought permission from the king to go to the border area. The Baskerville family, originally from the islands, had moved to the Leru Ileto Mountains, where the barbarians made their home. He sent out many people in search of her. There was still no sign of his daughter. As time passed and the pain of Miss Penelope's disappearance grew, with no clear sign of whether she was alive or dead, the patriarch. Back in the present, Viker was still astonished as he recalled that story. He thought, after that incident, Hugo's hatred for the barbarians became almost insane, turning him into a cold-blooded killing machine. His only goal in life was to kill the beasts and the barbarians. This sounds completely absurd, but the living proof is right here. Penelope, the daughter of Rosanna, the only woman Hugo ever loved, and Penelope's daughter, Pomerian. If my assumption is correct, this little girl is actually Hugo's biological granddaughter. If a man despises the barbarians and views his own child as a tool were to see his granddaughter, a child with half the bloodline of these barbarians, I wonder what expression would cross his face. Viker gently ruffled Pomerian's hair, saying, "Looks like you've been treated pretty badly in the Rococo tribe, huh? Why don't you come with me?" Pomerian stared at Viker in surprise. Viker tried to put on a friendly smile, silently questioning himself. I hope this smile looks okay. Pomerian looked at Viker and said, "Mom, hair, eyes, similar." Viker gently explained, "Yes, the Baskerville family members do look very similar. You can call me Uncle." Pomerian quietly called out, "Uncle." She turned to look at the grave she had tried so hard to make. She remembered her mother's words from the past. "Pomerian, if you meet someone with red eyes, follow that person." Pomerian gazed at the pile of stones and said, "Mom." Viker was surprised. Pomerian grabbed the hem of Viker's pants. Bowing her head, she said, "Uncle, I'll go with you." That was the moment fate brought together two lonely souls from the iron-blooded sword family. After taking Pomerian back to the Black Clan on a beautiful day, Pomerian wore clean clothes and had her hair tied up neatly. She peeked through the curtain and asked, "Uncle, where are you going?" Viker replied, "I have to go to class for a bit. The clan leader has called for me." Pomerian pouted and ran after him, saying, "Uncle, can I go with you?" Viker held Pomerian on his arm. He thought, is the little one afraid of being left alone? It's good that she's opening up to me, but taking care of a child is more exhausting than I expected. As Viker walked, he looked at the girl comfortably resting behind him and helplessly thought, I guess I just have to deal with it. He continued to ponder, she can't grow up here in a place far from Hugo's sight, and she needs to be exposed to at least some of the Empire's culture. Viker glanced at the peacefully sleeping Pomerian behind him and thought, maybe I should ask the chief for help. I have to leave the forest and get down to the city at least once. At the tent where everyone gathered for a meeting, Aquila asked seriously, "So, there's an outbreak?" Aquila continued, "The rainy season is approaching and this is certainly a big issue. If the disease keeps spreading during the rains, the damage will be even worse." A human disagreed, saying, "Chief, this isn't a disease. It's just a curse." Aquila looked at a human, who was still trying to convince him. "We just need to break this curse. We must offer a great sacrifice." Ayan argued, "It's not a curse. We just need to leave the village and move somewhere else." Hearing Ayan, the village elders rejected her idea. "This is a sacred place where our ancestors have been laid to rest for generations. How can you say we can just leave? We have lived here for 200 years. The younger generation, who held more modern views, pushed back as well. What if the disease spreads here and kills our children? What then? We won't have anyone to carry on the future of our tribe. These young lives could disappear if we cling too tightly to our ancestors' land." The elders remained stubborn in their beliefs and responded, "This is definitely a curse. Eating a poisonous mushroom could cause this kind of condition. The spirits of our ancestors are furious at your disregard for their land. Surely insects have spread the toxins." Then a voice spoke up, "Chief, please make a decision." Aquila was still unsure of what to do, and she fell silent, deep in thought. Viker sat in the back, watching the meeting. Pomerian was asleep, resting his head on Viker's thigh. He thought to himself, the Red Death. The Red Death is just as dangerous as the Black Death, and it has caused immense damage to the Empire in the past. This terrifying plague spreads at a breakneck speed and has even crossed the Empire's borders. The reason the Empire remains safe is that Camus from the Morg family has created a firewall to prevent the spread. The Holy Maiden of the Quovitus clan uses her powerful divine energy to eliminate the plague, but her protection only extends within the Empire's territory. The vast majority of the barbarians living in the forest and the Liru Eleno mountain have perished. He realized this is advantageous for the Baskerville family. As soon as the barbarian threat in the deep woods disappears, countless low-level monsters will emerge, leading to a wave of creatures that cause casualties among the civilians. The Empire requested the Baskerville family, who are guarding the borders, to deal with the monsters. Ultimately, the Baskerville family successfully protected the borders, and as a result, Hugo's political influence grew rapidly. Back in reality, Aquila looked at Viker in confusion as he raised his hand. Viker also raised his hand, expressing his opinion. "I know how to stop the Red Death." Viker resolved himself, "This time, not you, Hugo." The goblin was hung upside down with a rope. It was then lowered into a bucket of water, and someone pulled it back up. The Black Tribe members, who were watching, wore cloths over their mouths and noses. After a while, the goblin went from being fine to having a sickness, covered in red spots. They exclaimed, "He's really got the Red Death." A warrior from the Black Tribe immediately threw it into a fire nearby. Ayan cheerfully removed his cloth and said to Viker, "The goblins we pushed into the contaminated water all ended up with the Red Death, just like you said." so it really spreads through water, right? Viker replied, yeah, contaminated water is the biggest cause of the disease, but if you boil the water, it won't be a problem anymore. Ayan looked at the goblins and said, so boiling water is safe. The goblins were startled and scared. One goblin was tied with a rope and dipped into a pot of boiling water. It screamed in pain, keek. When it was pulled up, its spirit seemed to have vanished. Ayan stammered, it just died instantly. Viker responded, put it into cold water. Ayan agreed, all right. They submerged the goblins in cold water and then pulled them out. The members of the Black Tribe who witnessed this were delighted, saying, that's right, they've been in there for a while and aren't infected. We found a way to beat the Red Death. It's boiling water. If we boil water, will that stop the disease from spreading? Aquila praised Viker, saying, well done. Thanks to you, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm very grateful. Viker replied, we can't let our guard down yet. They can't spread through our eyes or skin, but they can through the respiratory system, so be careful in the fog during dawn. Ayan scoffed. Oh, someone said that was a curse rite. A human gritted his teeth and said, huff. A human brought up the tribal challenge, saying, so we have to avoid water. The rainy season is coming. How can we avoid water? Everyone else agreed, that's true. When it rains, the river will overflow and the air will become humid. Boiling water and keeping clean will be hard. One person suggested, so we have to move the village. A human's face went stiff as he asked, what could you say? A human shouted in anger, didn't I say we can't abandon the land where our ancestors fell? Are you ignoring my elders' words? Viker stepped forward and said, there's a way for us to stay within the Black Territory. In the blink of an eye, time passed. The rainy season quickly arrived in the forest. The floodwaters rose high, turning what was once a plain into a deep marsh in the woods. This flooding was something even the elders had never witnessed, and it submerged everything in the forest. Except for the black village, the warriors shouted, pull and tie it tight. Their loud cries drowned out the sound of the rain. Raise it up, tie it tight, don't let it fall. The Black Tribe had built their homes high up in tall trees. They traveled between houses using ladders that connected each home, creating a system of tree houses. The rising water couldn't touch them. A black warrior said with satisfaction, even with this rain, the village is still dry. Another person, filled with admiration, said, it's all thanks to him. Two people shouted from below, praising Viker. Viker, thanks to you. Our village isn't flooded. Thank you so much. We're glad we listened to you. Viker stood in the rain, thinking, fortunately, there are many tall trees in the Black Territory, so we can get through this rainy season. Pomerian snuggled in the tent, whined, Uncle, I want to go out with you. Viker was startled when he saw a dark shape beneath the water. He warned the two soldiers who had just praised him. Hey, be careful. That's dangerous. The dark shape surfaced, revealing a monster that opened its mouth wide, showcasing its 4 sharp fangs. The two soldiers were taken aback and couldn't react in time. Ayan pulled an arrow from her quiver and shot it straight at the monster. With a serious expression, she said, get lost, you filthy catfish. Veer asked, is that Washushu? Ayan replied, that used to be the king of this land for 1,000 years. We call it Ka. Ka, enraged, used its massive tail to destroy the tent that the soldiers had worked so hard to set up. Viker jumped down and shouted, how dare you destroy the home we struggled to build? Viker activated Beelzebub and said, I will put you in line. Viker used the 6th ultimate technique of the Baskerville clan, causing the creature to cry out before falling into the water. Its body floated bloated on the surface, a patch of blood spreading through the water. The two warriors who were lucky enough not to fall and clung to the trees in fear. The members of the Black Tribe who witnessed this cheered, wow. Viker chased Ka away. How many times has he saved us? Viker, you are the hero of Black. Viker landed and retrieved Beelzebub. A human clenched his fist and gritted his teeth. Ahan stood silently beside him. Ayan watched Viker with sparkling eyes, giving him a thumbs up in silent approval. As night fell, the tent of Viker and Pomerian was still lit. A delicious plate of steamed snails was giving off steam. Pomerian took a bite, and Ayan followed suit, both of them holding their cheeks, savoring the indescribable taste. Pomerian gave a thumbs up and said, so good, Uncle. Ayan laughed along, adding, you're right, Uncle, you really are a great cook. Viker helplessly replied, I didn't invite you to my house. Ayan laughed, if you smell something delicious, we have to go eat it, right? Veer replied, I didn't cook any for you. Ayan responded, the food of a servant is also the food of the master. What's yours is also mine. Viker asked, how many times do I have to say I'm not your servant? Ayan replied, I've told you not to be so petty. Pomerian remained silent for a moment before suddenly saying, you and Ayan are just like a married couple. Ayan blushed and laughed. She walked over, hugged Pomerian, and rubbed her cheek against the girl's, saying, "Oh, is that so? You're just too adorable." Viker watched the two as they laughed and playfully rubbed cheeks, thinking, when did they get so close? A gust of wind caught Viker's attention, making him notice a large figure standing outside the curtain. Ayan frowned and asked, "Why are you here?" Ahn stood tall in the rain in front of Viker's tent. Then he called out to Viker. The three inside looked out, surprised. Ahn was crying as he said, "I came here because you saved my village many times, so I'm begging you, Viker. Please help my sister." The girl was still at home, lying there, gasping for breath. Her body had some red spots on it. Outside, the rain poured down heavily. Inside Ahun's tent, the girl continued to gasp for air with a few red bumps on her skin. Viker and Ayan stood observing her. Viker asked, "When did the illness start?" Ahn replied, "It started yesterday. I think she waded into the swamp while we were cutting wood." Ayan said, "Ahul is a child who always wants to help others. Viker, have you figured out a way yet?" Viker answered, "Yeah." A human with wet feet stepped in. He held an umbrella as he walked in, saying she got what she deserved, going off and not listening to her grandfather. A human coldly remarked, "It's just bad karma. Listening to that miserable Imperial spy caused this." Ahun's heart ached as he said, "You're going too far." A human slapped Ahun hard across the face, shouting, "Shut your mouth." Ayan and Viker were both wide-eyed at the scene. He barked, "You useless boy, you're just like your parents." Ahn could only hold his cheek in silence. A human opened the door, turned his back, and said, "I already said it many times, this is a curse from the gods. We must perform the ancient ritual to extinguish it. Don't shame the black people by listening to an imperial fool." Even as a human walked away, he kept muttering, "Now that things are like this, the chieftain will surely allow it." Ayan gritted her teeth and said, "That old man." Ahn had a red mark on one cheek and could only lower his head and cry. Viker, over there, said, "There's a way to heal him." Ayan and Alan both paid attention to Viker after those words. Viker instructed, "Ahn, boil some water to disinfect the items that Ahul has used, then burn some charcoal to drive away any pests around the house. We need to create the best environment for Ahul to fight this illness and buy him a little more time." Ahn stopped crying as he listened to Viker. He asked, "Can you do that?" Wiping his tears, Ahn replied firmly, "I can." Ayan, anxious, asked Viker, "Viker, can you really save Ahul?" Viker replied, "Yes." He added, "But to do that, I need your help." Ayan suspiciously asked, "Me? I can do anything." Viker responded directly, making Ayan freeze, "Get me out of this forest." Viker looked at Ayan seriously, "So I can get the medicine." Ayan shouted, startling Ahn outside, "Don't say that." Ayan firmly refused. "Even if you are considered part of the Black, there are rules about entering other territories. My mother would never allow it." Viker said, "Right, the chief probably won't abandon Ahul." Viker proposed, "If everyone keeps it a secret, I could sneak out and return without being caught. Would you let me go, Ayan?" Ayan hesitated. Aye. Outside, the rain poured heavily, showing no signs of letting up. Everything became quiet as they felt a force brushing against the branches in the water. Viker, carrying Pomerian, jumped over logs to escape. As Viker was moving, he suddenly stopped, turned around, and asked, "Why are you following me? Didn't you say you let me go?" Ayan stopped, breath coming out in a mist. "Let's go together." Viker bluntly replied, "You'll be a burden to me." Ayan insisted, "Then tell me where you plan to go." Viker answered, "No." Ayan pressed on, "Then why are you bringing me along?" She fell silent, saying, "When you drew your sword and when you learned about the Red Death, I didn't ask anything." The rain mingled with her tears. Ayan spoke again, "You knew from the start that I would always be powerless before you. I didn't ask anything because you would disappear as soon as you answered." Ayan said sadly, "If you just answer one question, you would come back, right?" She closed her eyes tightly, pressing her lips together, afraid that she might hear an answer that would disappoint her. Viker said, "I will," and lifted his head, standing there watching Viker walk away. "You promised." The scene shifted to the Underdog office, where the manager, Chihuahua, sighed wearily. He looked out at the darkening sky and said, "It's completely dark now, and no matter how many papers I sort, the pile never seems to shrink." The moonlight streamed into the room through the window. Chihuahua stood by the window, feeling lonely and isolated. He started to confide in the moonlight, saying everything was so wonderful back then. When the vice consul was still here, it was tiring, but so much fun. I still can't believe he's gone. His eyes glistened with tears as he quietly murmured, "I miss him." Suddenly from above, Viker popped his head down and asked, "Did you call for me?" Chihuahua jumped in surprise, fear coursing through him as sweat trickled down his forehead. His eyes widened in disbelief as if he couldn't trust what he was seeing. Viker's unexpected appearance seemed to take a decade off his life. Viker gracefully jumped down from the windowsill. One hand cradled the Pomeranian who stood behind him, while the other propped against the ledge. He looked up and smiled, asking, "How are you?" Chihuahua sat down in a chair, still trembling but eager to listen to the brief story Viker had to share. After he finished, Chihuahua stared in astonishment, exclaiming, "So you confronted that monster in the forest, got seriously hurt, and lived with those barbarians?" Viker replied frankly, "Yeah." He leisurely took a sip of tea, keeping a calm expression. That was what he wanted everyone to believe. On his lap, the little Pomeranian slept soundly, breathing steadily. Chihuahua, still in disbelief, tried to confirm once more, So, you're really not a ghost?" Viker smiled calmly and replied, "You're shocked because you thought I was a ghost." The old manager complimented him softly, "You're just like before, managing Chihuahua." The elderly manager stood in shock for a moment, then burst into tears. "I'm so glad you're still alive." Chihuahua hugged his face and trembled, sobbing. Viker smiled. "You're still as honest as ever." Chihuahua suddenly noticed the child on Viker's lap and asked curiously, "But who is this child that looks like you? Is he your son with a barbarian?" Viker glanced at Pomerian and answered without any expression, "We share the same blood, but it's not exactly like you think." Chihuahua wiped his tears and thought to himself, "Same blood, but not how I imagined. Now I'm really curious." Ignoring the old man's curiosity, Viker continued, "While I was gone, if you look after him, his name is Pomerian." He cradled the sleeping child and added, "Since we're in this situation, it wouldn't hurt for you to teach him a few basic things." Chihuahua immediately perked up, saying, "It's been a while since I've received an order from you like this. Just leave it to me." Viker glanced at the pile of paperwork and books scattered across Chihuahua's desk and asked, "But don't you think it's a bit much for you to handle everything in Underdog City alone? If you need help, you can always find Cindy Wendy Sen Mezamadonaro." Chihuahua was startled and remembered questioning, "Isn't Cindy Wendy the criminal you let go 2 years ago? But how am I supposed to find her?" He looked confused. Viker calmly replied, "Do you remember when I was still in office and I gave her 10 billion? Chihuahua answered, "Yes, you gave it to Judy, the girl who pulled out the metal rod in the square that day." Viker explained, "She didn't have anyone backing her, so she's easy to reach. She's probably been traveling with that kid." He continued advising, "If Cindy Wendy doesn't cooperate, just tell her I'm still alive. She owes me, so she'll definitely help." Chihuahua smiled happily and said, "Got it. I understand now." The morning sunshine streamed through the consulate window. Chihuahua hurriedly asked, "But Deputy Consul, when will you return?" Viker smiled and calmly took a final sip of tea, replying, "I will return when I finish what I need to do. I must fulfill a promise first." In Viker's mind was the image of Ayan, drenched in rain, holding on to the hope that he would come back to save the Black Tribe. Viker stood up, preparing to leave. His thoughts turned to the illness plaguing the tribe. Ayan's disease could be easily cured with a drop of holy water from that clan. So I know what I need to do. Viker walked toward the window, leaving the child with the old manager. Pomerian had woken up and joyfully tugged on Chihuahua's mustache. This beard. The old man held the girl close, crying out, "Save me." Viker looked up at the sky, his eyes filled with determination. The sun had risen, the sky was clear and peaceful. A flock of doves flew leisurely in the morning light. Viker decided, "I'm going to the religious and holy Quo Vadis clan." At the entrance to the city of St. Mecca, 2 soldiers stood guard with strict expressions. They noticed a delivery truck approaching, hoping to pass through the gate. Immediately, the soldiers raised their spears to block the way. They commanded, "We will conduct a quick inspection of the truck." Inside the truck, there was just one driver and dozens of barrels of oil in the back. One soldier checked the identification and confirmed, "You are Joseph, the wealthy shopkeeper from the first floor. What are you carrying?" Manager Joseph smiled nervously and replied, "It's oil, all properly listed in my shipping permit." One soldier stepped closer, tapped on each barrel with his spear, and asked, "Can we check inside?" Joseph, feeling uneasy, responded, "I come here often. Is it really necessary to check so thoroughly?" The soldier remained stern and said, "Our superiors take the rules very seriously." Joseph felt a wave of panic. The soldier approached, scanning the barrels with his eyes, pondering which one to open. He randomly picked a barrel, muttering, "This one." Then he shook it vigorously. Joseph flinched, anxiously watching, and thought to himself, of all the barrels, he had to choose that one. The soldier opened the oil drum. He stared into it, his face expressionless. Nothing unusual here, just thick black oil inside. The soldier walked past Joseph and said with a laugh, "You can go through now." Old Joseph breathed a sigh of relief. The 2 soldiers stepped aside, widening the path for Joseph's cart, saying, "Welcome to St. Mecca." Joseph drove into a dark, secluded path, looking around to make sure no one else was around. Once he was certain, Joseph glanced back at the oil drums and whispered anxiously, "You can come out now." Now, Joseph wasn't sure which drum it was anymore. Suddenly, from one of the drums, a hand shot straight up, forcefully knocking off the tightly sealed lid. Joseph watched in horror, his face going pale. The heavy iron lid fell to the ground with a thud, becoming misshapen. From inside, a young man in a full mask stood up, his body covered in oil. In the eyes of the masked figure, there was a spark. He stepped outside, oil spilling all around him. Joseph felt a bit panicked as this strange young man approached him. "Fluster," he said, "I got you into Saint Mecca, so I'll be on my way now." The mysterious figure replied, "Wait a moment." He pulled a small pouch from his coat pocket and said to Joseph, "Here is the oxbear canine as I promised." Joseph raised both hands to receive it, eagerly thanking him. The old man watched the mysterious young man walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the alley in a daze. He had actually sat in oil for 2 whole hours. Joseph muttered, "I can't believe what I just witnessed. How could he possibly be human?" The masked young man stood atop the bell tower, looking down at the holy city of Saint Mecca, bathed in golden light of the setting sun. Finally, he removed his mask, letting out a sigh of relief. Viker held the mask in its hands and murmured, "This is the longest I have ever stayed underwater. Since that time, I managed 7 minutes in the Styx River." He exclaimed, emotionless, "I've successfully infiltrated Quo Vadis territory." Saint Mecca, the central city of the Quo Vadis clan, has a population of 160,000. Here, sexual desires and greed are completely banned due to the influence of the church. Even with gold lying underground, the people walk right past it. The citizens are acutely aware of order and peace, consistently adhering to the rules. The bells rang from the clock tower. Viker looked up, thinking to himself, "I just remembered, when the clock chimes, they stop to pray. It's so strange." Indeed, the people on the streets came to a simultaneous halt, bowing their heads humbly in their white cloaks and praying. Viker casually stepped down. He walked through the crowd, yet no one noticed him. He pondered, how can anyone live in such suffocating conditions? Before long, night fell. Darkness engulfed the streets of Saint Mecca, with no light source except the faint glow of the street lamps. Viker stood beside a well, bowing his head to pull out an item from his jacket. It was a small glass vial containing a light purple liquid. He opened the cap and, without hesitation, poured the liquid directly into the well. This solution is actually water contaminated with the infectious bacteria of the Red Death found in Ahol's blood, sweat, and tears. It's highly contagious, so if this is poured into the well, everyone will become infected right away. Although this seems extreme, the situation is urgent. Every second counts. This is a deeply religious area, so people will prioritize saving lives before any casualties occur. Viker stood silently by the well, lost in thought. Unfortunately, a group of kids returning from playing soccer at night spotted him. They immediately asked, "Who are you?" The children whispered among themselves, intrigued and frightened by Viker's strange and scary appearance. They said, "There's someone suspicious by the well. Let's just go. He looks too dangerous." Under the dim, ominous night sky, Viker loomed in a large black cloak with a raven-shaped mask covering his face. Just standing there, he emanated an eerie aura that made others hesitate. Suddenly, he turned his head and addressed the children in a harsh tone. The atmosphere darkened with a threatening presence. "Listen closely, kids. This well is cursed. Anyone who drinks from it will die." The children trembled in fear at his words. His eyes shone with a deadly red light. He growled, "Listen closely to what I'm saying." The kids were terrified. They all screamed and ran away in a panic, yelling, "It's a ghost! The ghost cursed the well. I'll never drink from that water." Viker watched them flee, so frightened they even left their ball behind. He thought to himself, "Good, that means the kids won't drink from this well." Viker dropped the knife he had taken from the Leviathan family, plunging it firmly into the ground beside the well. He muttered, "A dagger from the Leviathan family, famous for their deadly poisons." Anyone looking into this situation will see that the one spreading the deadly curse in the woods can only be from the Leviathan family. He smirked, his eyes gleaming with a hint of malice. The family of poisons and the religious family had maintained a good relationship for a long time. This would definitely spark a significant conflict. He was all set. Viker casually remarked, "It's almost time to pour the holy water. I should go meet the priestess Dolores." At that same time, the entire population of the city was rushing toward the sanctuary. They all hoped to meet the holy maiden Dolores, the saint of the Quo Vadis family. Inside the sanctuary, a girl quietly sat on a bench, looking down at the crowd in the distance. At the sanctuary in the city of Saint Mecca, masses gathered in the square. Even though it was dark, the bright moonlight shone down on them. The people were anxious and murmured, "We heard the holy maiden is resting here. We want to send our greetings to her. Please open the door." Another person tried to shout through the large iron door that was closed, "Holy maiden, please look at my illness. Please, we want to see your face. From inside the sanctuary, a gentle, fragile voice rose up. Is it really so late that you still come to see me? The crowd outside buzzed with excitement as they recognized the holy maiden's voice. Suddenly, a noble stepped forward. He proudly introduced himself. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the Lord of the Dortsmile territory. I am also the eldest son of the Jonathan family. Our family has sent many soldiers to fight for the kingdom, and I am the son-in-law of the Alphonse family as well. Another notable stepped forward, proudly declaring, I am the manager of the Ibsen community, overseeing the import and export activities of the Bourgeois family. I am also an honorary knight serving Count Boston La Baskerville, acting as his guard for the next 2 years. Then an older nobleman interrupted, speaking vigorously, If you can cure me, I will reward you with all the rich grain you could imagine. I will also offer you a beautiful seaside villa on the warm southern coast and exclusive, magnificent horse-drawn carriages. However, a soft voice like mist emanated from within the temple, cutting off their chatter. Please stop. Surely your identities and wealth are not enough to persuade me to open the door at this late hour. Her words left the crowd of nobles feeling disheartened. She continued, Please, everyone, go home. Hearing this, both the common people and the nobles had no choice but to leave, each heading home. Amid the bustling crowd leaving, Viker remained standing still, motionless. He pondered, Before rewinding, I often saw the saintess on the front lines of the battlefield. I saw her covered in blood, desperately tending to the wounded. Her pristine white outfit was stained with blood, and the holy light from her kept shining brightly. The saintess, I know, despises money and power. Viker stepped closer to the door of the sanctuary, staring intently at it. The saintess spoke again. Who are you that comes to seek me? Suddenly, Viker knelt, bowing his head to reply, Oh, just a lost little bird. The bright moonlight shone down. Alone, Viker remained quiet for a while as the door showed no sign of opening. He continued to kneel, waiting, with no one else around. Finally, the door of the sanctuary creaked open and the holy light illuminated his form. Please come in, the saintess said, and Viker succeeded. The sanctuary was magnificent, bathed in the light of God, featuring only a statue in the middle of the hall without a soul in sight. Viker moved straight ahead, approaching the statue in the middle of the holy water. The sweet voice of the saintess echoed from within the statue. How did you lose your way, young lamb? Viker thought to himself, Is she not going to meet me in person? Sucks, she has no reason to meet someone dressed so suspiciously. He placed a tightly sealed jar on the stone ledge by the lake and explained, I'm here to report that there's an outbreak spreading through the slums. I've brought water from their well. If you have magical powers, I'm sure you can detect the dark energy in this water. The statue remained silent. The priestess stayed quiet for a moment before suddenly exclaiming, You're lying to me. Immediately, heavy footsteps echoed from behind Viker as a group of guards rushed out the gilded door. They stood on the second-floor balcony, looking down at Viker. They formed a straight line, blocking the entire corridor. Viker stayed still, not moving an inch. From above, the commanding officer glared down at him and said, You're like a lost bird, but your words are quite bold. The officer sharply asked, Who are you? Viker quietly looked up at him, as if recognizing an old acquaintance, thinking to himself, It's been a long time since I've seen that face. The commander spoke up, Pietro Quo Vadis. Before the rewind, he was a soldier I trusted on the battlefield. He never compromised when it came to injustice, even in the name of righteousness. He was a merciful man, but he could also be more ruthless than the devil. The interrogation methods I once used on the young master in Underdog City came from him. Viker decided to speak. Meeting you here is quite interesting. Pietro was surprised but did not respond. He kept a serious tone. I hear you've come here to report on an outbreak, but your attire is quite suspicious. Unless you remove your mask and show proper respect, you cannot see the saintess. Pietro threatened, but Viker remained unfazed. He calmly replied, I wear this gas mask for a reason, so I cannot take it off. Since I've already submitted my report, I asked for permission to leave. However, Pietro was determined not to let him go. He threw a holy page straight at Viker. It whizzed past his face and stuck into the wall. Pietro held his holy weapon book, glaring at Viker. I can't let a suspicious person leave here. Viker glanced at the paper on the wall, now devoid of its glowing aura and fluttering like an ordinary piece of paper. He thought to himself, he just tossed that paper after channeling his spirit energy. He always uses those interesting weapons. Pietro jumped down in front of Viker, shaking the ground beneath him. He growled, I can sense a dark energy coming from the water pouch you brought. If there truly is a plague, you're the one spreading it. Viker replied calmly, If I were the culprit, why would I come here to report it? Pietro quickly retorted, I don't know, maybe it's a trick to lure the saintess out. Viker was slightly taken aback, thinking to himself, he's right about everything. Pietro opened the holy book and channeled his spirit energy, causing the pages to glow and transform into sharp, gleaming blades. He shouted, I'll listen to your confession after you're locked up in a cell. Viker turned and flew up, easily dodging all of Pietro's attacks. Even so, Viker couldn't shake the thought that if he used magic, they might discover he belonged to the Baskerville clan. However, Viker didn't need to use magic to take on an ordinary opponent like Pietro. He soared up to the balcony where the soldiers were stationed and jumped off with a powerful kick. The enchanted books that followed him shot straight into the balcony. As he smoothly turned in the air, he dived down towards Pietro, ignoring the rain of attacks coming his way. Viker activated his skill and used his foot to stomp down on the book in Pietro's hands. Pietro quickly lowered his head to shield himself. Although he blocked Viker's kick with both hands, Pietro was still astonished as he exclaimed, "It's so heavy. It feels like a boulder is weighing down on me. How can someone so small have such incredible strength?" Pietro used his strength to swing his arms, pushing Viker back. Viker quickly gripped the mask on his head tightly. Viker thought to himself, "The skills I gained after taking down the ox bear 2 years ago, which weighed 600 kilograms, are coming in handy now. This is the first time I'm using them, but they're not bad." As soon as he touched the ground, Viker immediately sprinted forward. He targeted Pietro, who was just recovering from Viker's surprise kick and was about to use the holy book as a shield. Pietro gritted his teeth and let out a frustrated gasp. Viker activated another skill. His hand lit up, flickering with tiny sparks. Burn injury Cerberus, a plus skill. Flames erupted from Viker's hand as he threw a straight punch at the holy book before Pietro could react. To Pietro's shock, the book ignited in flames as it made contact. He quickly dropped the burning book, yelling in disbelief. His hand was also slightly burned. He hurried to retreat near the holy water pool, holding his hand under the cool stream flowing from the statue to heal himself. Looking at Viker with caution and a hint of disbelief, Viker asked, "Do you want to continue?" Refusing to give up, Pietro shouted, clenching his fists together. "Using magic, huh? I knew right away you weren't a true believer." Pietro summoned his divine strength and charged at Viker, yelling in fury, "I won't let you escape." Quickly, Viker kicked the burning holy book lying at his feet. The book flew toward Pietro, distracting him for a moment. "Huh?" Pietro exclaimed as the blazing book obscured his vision. Seizing the opportunity, Viker rushed in and delivered a powerful punch right to Pietro's stomach. The punch was energized with his skill, ensuring it would knock Pietro out instantly. Pietro was sent flying into a statue, crashing into it and shattering it in two. He coughed up black blood and slumped down. The soldiers on the balcony were instantly thrown into a panic, looking at each other in disbelief. Am I dreaming? Did Lord Pietro actually lose? No way, how could this happen? Immediately, they rushed to surround the holy water pool and Pietro, raising their shields and swords, shouting in unison, "Protect Lord Pietro." Viker sighed, rubbing his head in frustration. With all these things going on, how can they not see and give it up? He mumbled, if he wants to know the whole story. Before Viker could finish his sentence, a gentle feminine voice floated down from the upper floor. Stop. It was Saintess Dollars, a girl with a pure and radiant beauty like the morning sun stepping out. The Saintess of the Quovadas family had appeared. She looked at Viker and asked, "Are you that lost little bird?" Viker was taken aback, thinking, Saintess Dollars. He instantly bowed his head and replied, "Yes." Dollars showed no fear. Despite having witnessed Viker's frightening strength, she softly responded, "You look more like a puppy than a bird, a puppy covered in wounds." Below, the soldiers shouted in panic, "Saintess, that's not just a useless little puppy. He's a bloodthirsty wolf." Yet, Dollars remained calm and composed. She calmly instructed, "Please bring us some tea." The soldiers were astonished and replied, "Yes." Viker stayed silent, realizing he had made a breakthrough. Dollars glanced at Viker, turned away, and said, "I need to talk to that person." Tea and snacks were neatly arranged on the table. Dollars slowly took a sip of her tea. She sat across from Viker with Commander Knight Pietro behind her. Although Pietro was extremely tense, alert, and uncomfortable with Viker's presence, Dollars remained completely calm. Viker quietly observed Dollars, thinking to himself, is she really 16 now? Saint Dollars Lum Quo Vadis, she looks so young and innocent compared to the adult version I met in my past life. He recalled the future during the war against demons when she treated the wounded soldiers on the front lines, saving countless lives. She truly was a living example of compassion. In this era of turmoil, just like everyone else, any martial artist who encountered her had to show respect, including him. He watched as Dolores lifted her gaze to meet his, her bright eyes filled with determination. "I've been feeling really stressed lately." Dolores suddenly spoke up, surprising Viker a bit. She calmly continued as if sharing a secret with a friend. "I don't know if you know this, but I'm a student at the Royal Academy of Colossio. Since it's a holiday, I'm taking a break from classes to handle some family matters." Viker was confused and thought, why is she suddenly being so casual? Dolores didn't seem to care. She glanced out the window and added, "But you see, nobles and merchants are always seeking me out. Their problems are mostly due to addiction and sexually transmitted diseases. No one is seriously ill." Dolores spoke about the crowd of nobles from earlier. She lifted her teacup to her lips and sighed. Justice, righteousness, virtue, and equality are all concepts from the divine. But why do people only focus on what's right in front of them? Viker suddenly replied, "Theology is essentially the process of understanding humanity, so that's only natural." Dolores looked up in surprise. She hadn't expected a response. She replied with genuine astonishment. Chapter 6, verse 9 of the Old Testament. As Moser said that. I can't believe someone knows about those ancient texts. Viker fell silent and did not answer. He quickly returned to the main topic and continued, "What's more important is that the outbreak is spreading in the slums of St. Mecca." Dolores immediately asked, "Is the information accurate?" Viker held up the jar from earlier and replied, "This is the jar of contaminated water we collected from the well." Dolores looked directly at him, her eyes brightening. "You're not involved in this incident, are you?" Viker maintained a calm tone and asked back, "If that's the case, why would I come here in person?" He thought to himself, "I can't escape suspicion. Should I try that approach?" With that in mind, he decided to give it a shot. He suddenly moved his hand. Pietro quickly noticed this and rushed in front of Dolores, shouting, "Saint, get behind me!" Dolores jumped in surprise, a shimmer of light appearing. Right in Viker's hand was the glow of divine power. He said cautiously, "I can elect to harm innocent people, especially in my hometown." Both Pietro and Dolores were taken aback. She exclaimed, "Divine power? Are you a follower of Lun?" Viker clenched his fist, drawing divine power back, and continued to persuade her. "Are you ready to hear what I have to say? I've discovered suspicious individuals pouring liquid from a glass vial into the water supply in the slums. They are the culprits." At that moment, Dolores was completely convinced. She asked in confusion, "If what you're saying is true, then what is their motive?" Viker quickly pulled out a scroll from his bag and explained, "The perpetrators likely want the Quo Vadis family to decline, benefiting those who take advantage of it." He spread the scroll across the table in front of Pietro and Dolores. Viker pointed directly at the Leviathan family and continued, "The one who stands to gain the most is the Leviathan family, along with the powerful Borgias family, who also has a stake in this. The Leviathan family will exploit the plague to collect samples from countless patients for their research. Moreover, once the Quo Vadis family falls, the Leviathan family, who are their rivals, will see this as the best opportunity. Then there's the Borgias family. Their treasures haven't disappeared in the midst of the epidemic. As workers die, landlords will go bankrupt, and fields, factories, and shops will be abandoned. Many properties, lands, and homes will become theirs. At that point, they will significantly increase their wealth." Although these were merely Viker's deliberate speculations aimed at shifting blame onto these two families, he always knew, "We can be certain that the ones responsible for the Crimson Death are the damned Leviathan. Their accomplices are the Borgias merchants and the indigenous people in the deep forest who have become sacrificial pawns for both families to profit from the wrongdoing. This is undoubtedly rooted in a desire for revenge against the Black Clan for sabotaging the Borgias' trading mission." Viker continued, "So I believe they have a close connection to this pandemic. Of course, this is just my hypothesis." Dolores gasped in surprise. She was momentarily stunned. It really makes sense. I never expected someone could predict the future so accurately. "Who are you?" Dolores asked bluntly, unaware of the dark atmosphere surrounding Viker. "Just call me Night Bloodhound." Dolores exclaimed, "That name is a bit strange." At that moment, Pietro, feeling calmer, commented, "It definitely suits your outfit. Quite blasphemous indeed." Dolores lowered her head, stroking her chin thoughtfully. "Oh, by the way, everything Night Bloodhound said could really happen." She turned to the commander and said, "Pietro, we need to get to the slums. We have to investigate the pandemic and report back to Father." Pietro replied respectfully, "I understand."